Rain hammered against bulletproof glass while Chicago drowned beneath storm clouds that turned afternoon into midnight. Inside the Moretti penthouse, Damien stood over his wife, with eyes colder than the steel in his gun safe, and said the 5 words that would destroy everything. I want you gone tonight. Zariah Bennett, philanthropist, silent queen beside a mafia king, the woman who built schools while he built fear, realized in that brutal second she had spent 3 years disappearing for a man incapable of seeing her. Tonight, at the Belladonna Gala, she would walk back into his world on the arm of his most dangerous lieutenant and remind every criminal, politician, and power broker in that ballroom what it looks like when an invisible woman decides to burn the whole game down. If you want to see how a discarded wife becomes untouchable, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Rain hammered the penthouse windows 73 floors above Chicago, with the kind of violence that made glass shudder in its frame. The storm turned downtown into a watercolor nightmare, buildings bleeding into fog, streetlights drowning in gray. Inside, the bedroom sat wrapped in silence, thicker than smoke after a shooting. Damien Moretti stood before the mirror, fastening platinum cufflinks onto black silk with the steady hands of a man who ordered executions over breakfast. At 38, he controlled drug corridors from Detroit to Miami, owned judges like trading cards, and moved money through shell corporations so clean the FBI spent 7 years chasing ghosts. His face belonged in marble, sharp jaw, dark eyes that never blinked first, the kind of brutal symmetry that made grown men check their exits. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Zariah Bennett stepped inside barefoot, her deep brown skin catching lamplight like honey poured over gold. The cream satin robe whispered against her curves as she moved with the careful lightness of someone who learned the hard way how much space she was allowed to occupy. Her natural hair fell in soft coils around her shoulders, unstyled, the way Damien preferred it when they were alone. Not that alone meant intimacy anymore. She reached toward his shoulder gently, fingertips stopping just short of contact. Please don't go tonight. Her voice barely made it across the room. Damien's reflection showed nothing. He adjusted the left cufflink, rotated his wrist, checked the alignment. Please? She tried again, softer this time, like volume might change the outcome. Just stay. We could talk. We could what, Zariah? The question came out flat, bored, the tone a husband used discussing expired milk. She flinched but held her ground. We could try, she whispered, like we used to. Damien turned slowly, and the look in his eyes hit harder than if he had swung. He didn't yell, didn't curse, just looked at her with the same dead expression he wore when signing execution orders. Then he moved. Not fast, not violent in the way movies made violence look, just deliberate. He placed one hand on her shoulder and shoved backward, not enough to bruise, just enough to erase her from his path like furniture that wandered into the wrong spot. Zariah stumbled against the edge of the mattress, catching herself with both palms pressed into silk sheets that cost more than most people earned in a month. The air tasted metallic. Damien straightened his collar, still facing her, still expressionless. I want a divorce. 4 words dropped like bodies into the Chicago River. Zariah's breath stopped. The room tilted. Rain hammered louder against glass, or maybe that was just blood pounding in her skull. You were never the woman I needed, Damien continued, adjusting his watch now, the Patek Philippe she bought him for their first anniversary before realizing gifts meant nothing to a man who valued only power. You're too soft, too quiet, too goddamn invisible. He reached for his coat draped across the leather armchair. I need someone who understands what it takes to build empires. Someone who commands rooms instead of hiding in corners pretending politeness is strength. Zariah's throat closed. I'm with Valentina Cruz now. The name landed like a blade between ribs. Valentina Cruz. Venezuelan supermodel with 12 million Instagram followers, Vogue covers in 14 countries, fragrance campaigns that turned her face into wallpaper across Times Square, the kind of woman photographers described as walking fire, and gossip columns called untouchable. Damien slid into his coat with the ease of a man who just ended a marriage the way most people canceled dinner reservations. When I return from the gala tonight, he said, walking toward the door without looking back, I expect this house empty. Take whatever you want. I'll have my attorney contact you Monday. His hand touched the doorknob. Don't make this complicated, Zariah. You were always smart enough to know when something's finished. The door closed. The lock clicked. And Zariah Bennett stood alone in a penthouse that suddenly felt like a mausoleum built for a woman who died 3 years ago, but kept walking around pretending the marriage could still be saved. She didn't move for 11 minutes, just stood there beside the bed with rain hammering the windows and her reflection staring back from the darkened television screen mounted on the opposite wall. The woman in that reflection looked hollow, tired, like someone who spent years making herself smaller, quieter, safer, until nothing remained but the faint outline of whoever she used to be. Her hands started shaking first, then her chest. Then her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the carpet, silk robe pooling around her like spilled cream. The tears came hard and ugly, the kind that ripped through the throat and left the face swollen. Not pretty movie crying, real grief, the kind that acknowledged something died that could never be resurrected. But beneath the tears, something else stirred. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculating rage that burned slow and permanent. Because the betrayal wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the cruelty of the dismissal. It was the replacement. Damien had already moved on. Probably weeks ago, maybe months, while Zariah still slept beside him every night, still attended his criminal fundraisers with a frozen smile, still convinced herself that love could survive on fumes and delusion. She pressed her forehead against the carpet and breathed through the ache. Then she remembered something she had buried so deep it felt like excavating bones. Before Damien Moretti, before becoming the silent wife of a mafia kingpin, before learning to disappear at dinner parties filled with drug lords and corrupt politicians, Zariah Bennett had been extraordinary. At 26, she founded the Bennett Horizon Foundation with money inherited from her grandmother and grit inherited from her mother. The organization funded literacy programs, business development training, and scholarship networks for underserved Black communities across 7 states. She negotiated with hostile city councils, fought crooked developers trying to gentrify neighborhoods, and built mentorship pipelines that transformed hundreds of lives. News outlets called her the quiet force reshaping urban education. Forbes listed her among 30 under 30 social innovators. She testified before Congress twice about education equity and criminal justice reform. Then she met Damien at a political fundraiser where he stood behind a legitimate real estate company that laundered cartel money through luxury developments. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room, spoke to her like her thoughts mattered, made her feel visible in a way she had craved since her father walked out when she was 9. 6 months later, they married. 1 year later, her foundation went dormant. 2 years later, she stopped attending board meetings. 3 years later, she became the woman Damien just shoved aside like misplaced furniture. Zariah pushed herself off the carpet and walked unsteadily toward the bathroom. Her reflection in the vanity mirror looked worse than she imagined. Eyes red and swollen, mascara streaked down her cheeks, the expensive silk robe suddenly looking like a costume worn by someone playing the role of trophy wife in a production nobody asked to see. She gripped the marble countertop until her knuckles turned pale. Then she spoke. "You are not invisible." Her voice cracked on the last syllable. Again. "You are not weak." Steadier this time. Again. "You are not what he said you are." The words tasted true. She turned on the faucet, splashed cold water against her face until the sting felt clarifying, then dried off with one of the monogrammed towels Damien insisted on buying. His initials, naturally, never hers. Back in the bedroom, she stood staring at her phone on the nightstand. One name sat at the top of her contacts, flagged as a favorite, even though she hadn't called him in months. Cassius Kane, Damien's second-in-command, the man who ran operations when Damien traveled, who handled negotiations too dangerous for lower-level lieutenants, who moved through violence with the efficiency of a surgeon and the morality of a philosopher trapped in the wrong profession. He was also the only man inside the Moretti Empire who ever looked at Zariah like she existed beyond decoration. At fundraisers, Cassius asked her opinion on policy reform. At family dinners, if you could call gatherings of mafia leadership family, he listened when she spoke, actually listened, instead of waiting for his turn to dominate the conversation. Once, 6 months ago, After Damien publicly humiliated her during a business dinner for suggesting a legitimate charitable partnership, Cassius followed her outside onto the restaurant terrace. "He's wrong," Cassius had said quietly, standing just close enough that she could smell his cologne, something clean and understated, nothing like Damien's overpowering designer fragrance. "What you said in there about community investment, that's the smartest strategy anyone's pitched in months. But he won't listen because he thinks kindness is weakness." Zariah had smiled sadly. "He thinks everything soft is weakness. Then he doesn't understand strength." The moment stretched too long, crossed into dangerous territory, and they both pulled back before acknowledging what hummed between them. She hadn't let herself think about it since. But now, standing in the wreckage of her marriage, she picked up her phone. The call connected after 2 rings. "Zariah?" Cassius's voice came through deep and alert, sharpened by concern. He always answered like that when she called, like her voice meant something required immediate attention. "He wants a divorce." Silence. Not the shocked kind, the dangerous kind, the kind before bullets started flying. "Where are you?" Cassius asked, and his tone shifted into something colder, harder. "Home. The penthouse. Did he hurt you?" "Not the way you mean." More silence, then, "Tell me everything." So she did. The shove, the dismissal, Valentina Cruz, the demand that she disappear by morning. When she finished, Cassius exhaled slowly, the sound of a man deciding whether to follow orders or burn the empire down. "He never deserved you," Cassius said finally. Zariah's chest tightened. "The Belladonna Gala starts in 2 hours," he continued. "Everyone who matters will be there. Politicians, businessmen, the entire syndicate leadership." She knew where this was going and started shaking her head even though he couldn't see. "Come with me." "Cassius, I can't." "You can. Walking into that ballroom on your arm after Damien just what? Told you that you don't matter? That you're invisible?" His voice dropped lower, steadier. "Then let's prove him wrong." Zariah pressed her palm against her sternum, trying to slow her hammering pulse. "He'll be there with her," she whispered. "I know." "Everyone will stare." "Good." She closed her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this." "Yes, you can. Because you're not the woman he described tonight. You never were. And it's time everyone in that room remembered who Zariah Bennett actually is." The words settled into her bones like truth, finally given permission to exist. "Okay," she breathed. "I'll pick you up in 90 minutes. The line went dead. Zariah stood holding the phone, heart pounding against her ribs, terror and exhilaration tangled so tight she couldn't separate them. Then she walked to her closet. The walk-in closet stretched the length of the bedroom, lined with designer gowns Damien insisted she buy for events where she stood silent beside him like expensive wallpaper. Most still had tags attached. She wore each once, smiled for photographs, then disappeared into the background while men discussed territory and bloodshed over champagne. But at the very back, behind dresses chosen by Damien's stylist, hung one gown she bought herself. Zariah pulled it free from the garment bag. Midnight black velvet with diamond embroidery stitched across the bodice in constellation patterns. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper rendered in crystalline detail. The neckline plunged low, the back cut lower, the silhouette designed to make men forget their own names. She bought it 8 months ago during a moment of defiance she immediately regretted. Too bold, too revealing, too much. Damien would hate it. Perfect. She laid the gown across the bed, then moved to the vanity and started working. Makeup first. Not the soft, natural look Damien preferred, but something sharper. Dramatic eyeliner that made her dark eyes look feline and dangerous. Deep burgundy lipstick that turned her mouth into a weapon. She twisted her hair into an elegant updo, leaving a few coils loose to frame her face. Then she stepped into the gown. The velvet slid over her curves like liquid shadow, cinching at the waist before flowing down to the floor in a train that whispered against the carpet. The diamonds caught lamplight and scattered it across the walls in fractured patterns. Zariah turned toward the full-length mirror. The woman staring back looked lethal, elegant, untouchable, like the kind of woman who walked through fire and came out the other side wearing a crown made from the ashes. She barely recognized herself. No, that wasn't true. She recognized exactly who she was. For the first time in 3 years, she stopped hiding. Call. Cassius arrived exactly 90 minutes later, driving his matte black Audi RE8, the kind of car that announced power without begging for attention. He stepped out wearing a tailored charcoal suit that fit like it was built specifically for his frame, which it was. Cassius understood presentation the way soldiers understood weapons. When Zariah emerged from the building lobby, he froze mid-step. His expression, usually controlled, unreadable, the face of a man trained to reveal nothing, cracked just enough to let shock bleed through. Zariah, her name came out rough, unfinished, like he forgot the rest of the sentence. She walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate, the gown's train trailing behind her like smoke. "Is this okay?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Cassius recovered, but his eyes stayed locked on hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "You look," he said quietly, "like every man in that ballroom is about to realize they underestimated you." Something warm unfurled in her chest. He opened the passenger door, waited until she settled into the leather seat, then closed it with the careful precision of someone handling something irreplaceable. They drove through rain-soaked streets in silence for several blocks before Cassius spoke. "You don't have to do this," he said. "If you want me to turn around, just say the word." Zariah watched Chicago blur past the window, light smeared into watercolor abstractions, the city looking exactly how she felt inside. "I spent 3 years making myself smaller," she said finally. "Quieter, safer. I convinced myself that if I just disappeared enough, he might finally see me." She turned to face Cassius. "But you can't love someone into seeing you. They either do or they don't. And Damien never did." Cassius's jaw tightened. "He's a fool." "Maybe, but I was foolish too, for believing him." "Then tonight we stop being foolish." The Audi pulled up outside the Belladonna Hotel, a historic building renovated into something between old-world elegance and modern excess. Valets moved like choreographed dancers, opening doors for Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, while security guards in expensive suits checked guest lists with the efficiency of military checkpoints. This wasn't a charity gala. It was a gathering of the country's most powerful criminals disguised as philanthropy. Cassius handed his keys to the valet, then moved around the car to open Zariah's door. When she stepped out onto the red carpet, camera flashes exploded like artillery fire. Photographers shouted questions. "Ms. Bennett, are you still with Damien Moretti?" "Cassius, is this official?" "Zariah, over here, give us a smile." She ignored them all and took Cassius's offered arm. Together, they walked toward the entrance. And with every step, Zariah felt something inside her shift. Not breaking, but realigning, like bones setting properly after years of healing wrong. The Belladonna ballroom dripped wealth from every surface. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from gilded ceilings. Gold candelabras lined tables draped in ivory silk. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner while waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most people's weekly groceries. But beneath the elegance, violence hummed. Every man in this room had blood on his hands. Every woman understood the cost of standing beside power. The laughter sounded polished, but eyes stayed sharp, tracking threats, calculating alliances, measuring weaknesses. When Zariah and Cassius entered, conversations didn't stop immediately. But they slowed. Heads turned. Whispers started spreading like wildfire across dry grass. Because everyone in this room knew exactly who Zariah Bennett was, the quiet wife of Damien Moretti. The woman who stood in corners during negotiations, the invisible force beside Chicago's most feared crime lord. Except tonight, she looked anything but invisible. She moved through the ballroom with her hand resting lightly on Cassius's arm, her posture straight, her expression calm. The diamonds across her gown caught light and threw it back in fractured patterns that made her look like she was wearing the night sky. "There," Cassius murmured, tilting his head toward the far corner. Damien stood near the bar surrounded by syndicate leadership, men who controlled drug corridors, weapon shipments, and political corruption from Boston to Los Angeles. He wore black Armani, his hair slicked back, a whiskey glass balanced in one hand while the other rested possessively on Valentina Cruz. She looked exactly like her photographs, devastatingly beautiful, with golden brown skin, sleek dark hair cascading down her back, wearing a scarlet gown that clung to every curve. The kind of woman who walked red carpets and made entire countries pause to stare. But standing beside Damien, she looked smaller somehow, diminished, like beauty alone couldn't fill the space his ego required. Zariah's steps didn't falter. She walked straight toward them. The crowd parted automatically, sensing blood in the water. Damien saw her approaching, and his entire body went rigid. The whiskey glass tilted dangerously in his grip, amber liquid sloshing against crystal. For 3 years, he had looked at his wife like she was furniture. Now he stared like he was seeing a stranger. No, worse, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time and realizing what he had thrown away. Zariah stopped 3 feet from him, close enough that Valentina shifted uncomfortably. Damien! Her voice carried across the sudden silence like a blade drawn from its sheath. He recovered quickly, sliding the cold mask back over his shock. Zariah, I told you. You told me to be gone by morning, she interrupted smoothly. It's still evening, so technically I'm right on schedule. A few people nearby tried and failed to suppress smiles. Damien's jaw clenched. This isn't the place. For honesty? Zariah tilted her head slightly. You're right. This room's built on lies. But I'm done pretending. She pulled a folded envelope from the small clutch purse hanging from her wrist and held it out. My attorney will contact yours Monday morning. The divorce papers are ready for your signature. I'm keeping the foundation assets. They were mine before we married, and they'll be mine after. You can keep everything else, the penthouse, the cars, the offshore accounts I pretended not to know about. Damien didn't take the envelope. Valentina stared at Zariah with an expression somewhere between confusion and respect, like she was trying to reconcile the woman in front of her with whatever Damien had described. You look incredible, Valentina said suddenly, her accent adding music to the words. The comment landed like a grenade in the middle of the standoff. Damien's head snapped toward her. Valentina said, I'm serious. Valentina's gaze stayed locked on Zariah. Whatever he told me about you was clearly bullshit. The ballroom collectively inhaled. Zariah almost smiled. Thank you. Then Cassia stepped forward, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. For years, he had been Damien's most trusted lieutenant, the man who handled operations too sensitive for anyone else, who walked into cartel negotiations and came out alive, who commanded respect through competence rather than fear. Tonight, loyalty died. I'm done, Cassius said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. Done pretending I don't see what's happening. Done standing silent while you treat people like assets to be managed. He turned to face Zariah fully, and his expression softened into something raw and unguarded. I love you. 3 words. The ballroom stopped breathing. I've loved you for 2 years, Cassius continued. Watched you make yourself smaller for a man who only values what feeds his ego. Watched you pour loyalty into someone incapable of returning it. His eyes never left hers. But I see you, Zariah, fully. And if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you never needed to beg for love in the place. Silence stretched so tight, it felt like the chandeliers might shatter from the tension. Zariah's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands trembled. Every eye in the room pressed against her, waiting for the response that would either shatter or rebuild the power structure of Chicago's criminal underworld. She looked at Damien one last time. The man who made her feel invisible, who valued power over partnership, who threw her away the moment someone shinier caught his attention. Then she looked at Cassius, the man who saw her when she stopped seeing herself, who listened when everyone else talked over her, who stood here in front of Chicago's most dangerous criminals and risked everything to tell the truth. Zariah stepped forward and took his hand. You noticed me, she said softly, even when I stopped noticing myself. Cassius's expression cracked into something between relief and wonder. Then Zariah smiled, real, warm, alive, and the room understood instantly that the balance of power just shifted beneath their feet. Damien stood frozen while fury and something uglier twisted across his face. Not anger, fear. The kind that came from realizing too late that what you discarded as worthless was actually priceless. Zariah and Cassius turned together and walked toward the exit, while whispers exploded behind them like wildfire consuming oxygen. They didn't run, didn't rush, just moved through the ballroom with the calm certainty of people who finally stopped pretending. Outside, rain had softened into mist, turning the Chicago skyline into something dreamlike and distant. The Audi waited at the curb, and Cassius opened the passenger door. Before Zariah could climb inside, he caught her wrist gently. "I meant every word," he said. She looked up at him. This man who had been her friend when friendship felt impossible, who had protected her in small ways she only now recognized, who had waited years without demanding anything in return. "I know," she whispered. Then she kissed him. Not carefully, not tentatively, like someone who finally stopped apologizing for wanting something real. Cassius responded immediately, one hand sliding into her hair while the other pulled her closer, and for the first time in 3 years, Zariah felt visible. Not because someone looked at her, because someone actually saw her. Inside the ballroom, Damian Moretti watched through the glass doors as his wife, former wife, kissed another man beneath the Chicago skyline. Valentina appeared beside him, holding the diamond necklace he had given her earlier that evening. "Here," she said, pressing it into his palm. "You don't actually love anyone. You just collect trophies." She walked away without waiting for a response. Damian stood alone in a room filled with criminals and politicians, surrounded by power that suddenly felt empty, staring at the woman he failed to value as she became untouchable in another man's arms. And for the first time in his life, Damian Moretti understood what it meant to lose something irreplaceable. The Audi's engine purred through rain-slicked streets, while Chicago blurred past the windows in streaks of neon and shadow. Cassius drove with one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped around Zariah's fingers, resting on the center console. Neither spoke. The silence felt dense with everything that just detonated back at the Belladonna. Careers ending, alliances fracturing, power structures crumbling beneath the weight of 3 words spoken in front of Chicago's most dangerous criminals. Zariah's phone vibrated for the 18th time in 12 minutes. She didn't look. "You should check that," Cassius said quietly, his thumb tracing small circles across her knuckles. "I know who it is." "Damian?" "Among others." The phone buzzed again, then again, a rhythm building toward something explosive. Cassius pulled into the underground parking garage of his building in River North, a converted industrial warehouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of security system that made paranoid criminals feel safe. He killed the engine, but neither moved to exit. Rain drummed against concrete above them. "What happens now?" Zariah asked, staring at their intertwined hands like the answer might be written in the spaces between their fingers. Cassius exhaled slowly. "Honestly, I don't know. I just burned every bridge I spent 15 years building." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He turned to face her fully. "I've watched you disappear piece by piece for 3 years. Tonight was the first time I saw you fully alive again, and I'd rather lose everything than watch you keep dying beside a man incapable of seeing what he had." Zariah's chest tightened. "Damian won't forgive this. You know that, right? He doesn't forgive betrayal." "I'm counting on it." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, realizing the ground behind you just crumbled away. They rode the elevator to the 8th floor in silence. Cassius's loft stretched open and minimalist, exposed brick walls, dark hardwood floors, leather furniture that looked expensive and understated. Everything precise, controlled, the space of a man who lived most of his life managing chaos. Zariah walked to the windows overlooking the Chicago River. The city glittered beneath the rain like broken glass scattered across velvet. Behind her, Cassius poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter on the bar cart. He crossed the room and handed her one, then stood beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "To burning bridges?" he said, raising his glass. Zariah almost smiled. "To building new ones." They drank. The whiskey burned clean and smooth, nothing like the cheap liquor her mother used to hide in the kitchen cabinets when Zariah was young. This tasted like money, and decisions made without looking back. Her phone started ringing, not buzzing, full volume ringing. Zariah pulled it from her clutch, and the screen lit up with Damien's name. Cassius watched her face carefully. "You don't have to answer." "I know." But she did anyway. Put the phone to her ear, said nothing. Damien's voice came through rough and sharp. "Where are you? Does it matter? You walked out of that gala with Cassius Kane in front of every person who matters in this city. So yes, Zariah, it fucking matters." She could hear background noise, voices, car doors slamming, the particular chaos that followed Damien everywhere like an entourage. "I'm somewhere safe," she said calmly, "which is more than I can say about the last 3 years. Silence stretched across the line. Then Damien laughed, and the sound carried no humor whatsoever. "You think Cassius is safe? You think he protects you? He's a lieutenant in my organization, Zariah. Everything he has, I gave him. His position, his reputation, his money, all of it flows through me." Zariah's grip tightened on the phone. "Then maybe he's ready to build something that doesn't depend on you." "Nothing exists without me." The arrogance in those 4 words crystallized everything wrong with their marriage into a single moment of perfect clarity. "You're wrong," Zariah said quietly. "I existed before you, and I'll exist after." She hung up. Cassius stood watching her with an expression somewhere between admiration and concern. "He's going to retaliate," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know. Hard. I know." Zariah finished her whiskey in one swallow and set the glass on the window ledge. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline finally crashing after burning hot for hours. "I need to sit down," she said. Cassius guided her to the leather sofa, then disappeared into the kitchen. He returned minutes later with a plate of cheese, crackers, and grapes. Nothing fancy, just real food to counterbalance the alcohol and emotional detonation. They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes before Zariah spoke. "Tell me about the first time you knew." Cassius looked up from the grapes he was arranging on a cracker. "Knew what?" "That you loved me." His expression softened into something unguarded and raw. 2 years ago, spring fundraiser at Navy Pier. You wore that yellow dress Damien hated because he said it made you look too happy. He spent the entire night ignoring you while he networked with cartel representatives, and you stood alone near the railing watching boats go by. Zariah remembered that night, remembered feeling invisible despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. "I came outside to check on you," Cassius continued, "asked if you were okay. And you smiled, this sad, broken smile, and said, 'I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.' But your eyes said something completely different." He set down the cracker without eating it, and I realized in that moment I would burn down everything I built if it meant you never had to fake another smile for a man who didn't deserve your honesty. Zariah's throat closed. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because you were married. And despite everything, I watched you try. You kept showing up, kept hoping, kept believing Damien might wake up one day and actually see you." His jaw tightened. "I wasn't going to be the reason you stopped trying, but I also couldn't keep pretending I didn't feel what I felt." Zariah reached across the space between them and took his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For making you wait. For being so focused on saving something already dead that I missed what was right in front of me." Cassius pulled her closer until her head rested against his chest. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, and for the first time in years, Zariah felt safe enough to let her guard down completely. "You have nothing to apologize for," he murmured into her hair. "Loving someone doesn't come with an expiration date just because they don't love you back. You gave everything you had. That's not a failure. That's courage." They stayed tangled together on the sofa while rain hammered the windows and Chicago glittered below, 2 people clinging to something fragile and new, while the world they knew began tearing itself apart. Zariah woke at dawn with her neck cramped and her dress twisted uncomfortably beneath her. Cassius had draped a blanket over them both sometime during the night, but they were still on the sofa, still fully clothed, still holding on to each other like letting go meant drowning. Pale light filtered through the windows, turning the loft gray and dreamlike. Her phone sat on the coffee table where she left it, the screen dark but somehow menacing. She extracted herself carefully from Cassius's arms without waking him, then padded barefoot across cold hardwood to the bathroom. Her reflection in the mirror looked like war aftermath, makeup smeared, Hair falling from its elegant updo in messy tangles, the diamond-encrusted gown now wrinkled and bunched around her waist. She washed her face with hand soap, trying to scrub away evidence of the night before. It didn't work. Some things left marks that water couldn't erase. When she emerged, Cassius stood in the kitchen area pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He had removed his suit jacket and tie, rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows. Even disheveled, he looked dangerously put together. "Morning," he said, sliding 1 mug across the counter. "Morning." The word felt insufficient for the magnitude of what they were walking into, but small talk sometimes carried weight when everything else felt too heavy to lift. Zariah wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat seep into her palms. "I need to go home," she said. "Get my things before Damien changes the locks or burns everything I own." Cassius's expression darkened. "He wouldn't he?" The question hung between them. "I'm coming with you," Cassius said firmly. "That'll make things worse." "Things are already worse. At least this way you're not alone." Zariah wanted to argue, but exhaustion and gratitude tangled too tight to separate. She nodded. An hour later, they pulled up outside the Moretti penthouse building. Morning light turned the glass tower into something cold and reflective, the kind of architecture designed to intimidate rather than welcome. The doorman, Marcus, who always smiled at Zariah and asked about her foundation work, looked nervous when they approached. "Ms. Bennett," he said quietly. "Mr. Moretti left instructions." "Yes." "I'm just collecting my personal belongings," Zariah interrupted gently. "I'll be gone within the hour." Marcus glanced at Cassius, recognition and concern flickering across his face, then stepped aside. The elevator ride to the 73rd floor felt longer than usual. Cassius stood close, but not touching, his body positioned slightly in front of hers, the instinctive stance of someone trained to intercept danger. The penthouse door was unlocked. That should have been the first warning. Zariah pushed it open and stopped dead. The living room looked like a tornado hit it, furniture overturned, lamps shattered. The abstract painting she bought from a local black artist during their first year of marriage, the one piece of decoration Damien let her choose, torn from the wall and slashed through the canvas. Glass crunched beneath her feet as she moved deeper into the destruction. "Zariah, wait!" Cassius grabbed her arm, but she pulled free and walked toward the bedroom. The door hung open. Inside was worse. Her clothes ripped from their hangers and scattered across the floor, shoes destroyed. Jewelry box overturned with necklaces and bracelets tangled together like metal vines. The mattress slashed open, stuffing bleeding out like exposed guts. In the center of the bed, someone had left a single photograph. Zariah picked it up with trembling hands. It was from their wedding day. Her in white lace, radiant and hopeful. Damien beside her looking like he owned the world. Someone had taken a knife and carefully cut Zariah's face out of the image, just her face, leaving a ragged hole where she used to be. Cassius appeared in the doorway and went completely still when he saw what she was holding. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. Zariah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, just stared at the mutilated photograph while her brain tried to process the violence embedded in such a precise, deliberate act. Then Cassius's phone rang. He answered without checking the caller ID, his eyes never leaving Zariah's face. "Kane." Whatever the voice on the other end said made every muscle in his body go rigid. "When?" Sharp, urgent, a pause. "How bad?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm on my way." He hung up and crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping Zariah's shoulders carefully. "We need to leave. Right now." "What happened?" "Someone just hit the Bennett Horizon Foundation headquarters. Firebombed the office. The building's gone." The words didn't make sense at first. Zariah's brain couldn't connect the sounds into meaning. Gone? Burned. Completely. Fire department's still on scene, but they're saying it's a total loss. Reality slammed into her like a freight train. "Oh my God. My staff. No one was inside. It happened at dawn. The building was empty." Relief and horror crashed together. "Damien did this," she whispered. "We don't know that." "Yes, we do." Cassius's silence confirmed it. Zariah looked around the destroyed bedroom, her life ripped apart and scattered like trash. Then she thought about the foundation headquarters burning while firefighters tried to contain the damage. All the files, all the grant proposals, all the records of students helped, families supported, communities transformed. Gone. Erased. Like she had never mattered at all. Something cold and sharp calcified in her chest. "He wants to break me," she said quietly. "He won't." "He already started." Cassius turned her to face him fully. "Listen to me. Damien thinks destroying your work destroys you. But your foundation isn't a building, Zariah. It's you, your vision, your heart, and that doesn't burn." She wanted to believe him. But standing in the ruins of everything she spent years building, belief felt impossible. "We need evidence," she said suddenly, her mind shifting into survival mode. "Photos. Documentation. Proof he did this." "The police won't do anything. You know that. Damien owns half the department. But public opinion?" She pulled out her phone. "That's different." She started photographing everything. The destroyed bedroom, the slashed painting, the mutilated wedding photo, every angle, every detail, building a visual record of violence disguised as heartbreak. Cassius watched her work, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition that the woman standing in front of him wasn't broken. She was calculating. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully. "I'm thinking Damien believes I'm invisible, that I'll disappear quietly and let him rewrite history." She turned to face him. "But I'm not invisible, and I'm done disappearing." They left the penthouse 20 minutes later, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs, and Zariah's phone filled with evidence. The doorman looked relieved to see them exit alive. Back at Cassius's loft, Zariah immediately opened her laptop and started working. Her fingers flew across the keyboard while Cassius made phone calls in the corner, his voice low and urgent, activating networks, calling in favors, building defenses. Zariah pulled up the Bennett Horizon Foundation social media accounts, 140,000 followers across platforms, built slowly over 7 years through authentic community engagement. She drafted a statement, revised it 3 times, then hit post. The message was simple, direct, devastating. "This morning, someone burned down the Bennett Horizon Foundation headquarters. All records destroyed, all resources gone. But here's what they can't burn. The 3,000 students we've helped graduate. The 500 businesses we've helped launch. The 47 communities we've transformed. The foundation is more than a building. It's all of you, and we're not finished. If you've ever benefited from our work or believe in what we're building, now is the time to stand up." Zariah Bennett. She attached the photos. The destroyed office. The burned files. But not the penthouse. Not yet. That ammunition stayed loaded for when she really needed it. She hit publish and watched the post go live. Within minutes, comments started flooding in. "This is devastating. Who would do this? I'm donating right now. The Bennett Foundation changed my life. I'm sharing everywhere." The shares climbed, 100, 500, 2,000. Local news outlets started picking up the story. Bennett Foundation headquarters destroyed in suspected arson. Community rallies behind Zariah Bennett after foundation office burns. By noon, the story had momentum. By 3 o'clock, donations started pouring in from across the country, people who heard about the fire and wanted to help rebuild. Zariah sat staring at the laptop screen, watching numbers climb, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't separate. Grief, gratitude, rage, hope, all tangled together into something that burned behind her sternum like swallowed fire. Cassius appeared behind her with food she didn't remember him preparing. "You need to eat," he said gently. "I need to keep working." "Zariah." She finally looked up. His expression carried the kind of concern that bypassed words and went straight to truth. "You've been going for 6 hours straight," he said. "Your body needs fuel." She hadn't realized that much time had passed. The afternoon light slanting through the windows surprised her. Reluctantly, she closed the laptop and accepted the plate of pasta he handed her. They ate on the sofa in silence, the television playing muted news in the background. Halfway through dinner, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered anyway. "Zariah Bennett?" The voice was female, young, uncertain. Speaking. "My name is Michaela Torres. I'm a reporter with the Chicago Tribune. I'm covering the fire at your Foundation headquarters, and I was hoping to ask you a few questions. Zariah's pulse quickened. What kind of questions? Background mostly, the Foundation's history, your plans moving forward, but also... The reporter hesitated. There are rumors circulating about potential connections to organized crime, specifically about your relationship with Damian Moretti. There it was. The angle every journalist would eventually chase. Zariah glanced at Cassius. He was watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. I'll answer your questions, Zariah said slowly, but I have conditions. I'm listening. You print everything I say, unedited. No selective quotes taken out of context to fit whatever narrative you're building. Silence on the other end. Then, I can't promise that without knowing what you're going to say. Then I guess you don't get the story. Zariah could hear the reporter breathing, weighing the risk. Okay, Michaela said finally. Deal. They scheduled an interview for the following morning. When Zariah hung up, Cassius leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. You're sure about this? He asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. If you go public about Damian, I'm not going public about his operations. I'm going public about mine, about the Foundation, about what happens when powerful men try to erase women who stop playing their games. Cassius studied her face for a long moment. You're going to war, he said quietly. I've been at war. I just finally stopped pretending it was peace. Oh, shit. The interview happened at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, chosen specifically because it was public, visible, and far from Moretti territory. Michaela Torres turned out to be mid-20s with sharp eyes and a recording app already open on her phone when Zariah arrived. Cassius waited outside in the Audi, close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough to give Zariah space. They ordered coffee, made small talk, established ground rules. Then Michaela hit record and got straight to business. Tell me about the fire. Zariah described arriving at the Foundation headquarters the morning after the Belladonna Gala, finding the building reduced to smoking wreckage, watching firefighters spray water onto ruins that used to house 7 years of work. Do you have any idea who might have done this? Michaela asked. Zariah chose her words carefully. I have suspicions, but no proof. Your separation from Damian Moretti was made very public 2 nights ago at the Belladonna Charity Gala. Multiple sources confirmed you left the event with Cassius Kane, one of Moretti's top lieutenants. Some people are suggesting the fire might be retaliation. Some people would be right. Michaela's eyebrows shot up. You're saying Damian Moretti ordered the arson? I'm saying powerful men don't like losing control. And when they lose control, they lash out. Whether Damian personally ordered it, or whether someone acting on his behalf decided to send a message, the result is the same. They tried to erase my work because they couldn't erase me. That's a serious accusation. It's a factual observation. Michaela leaned forward. Were you aware of Damian Moretti's criminal activities during your marriage? Zariah had prepared for this question. I was aware my husband operated in circles that existed outside the law, but awareness and participation are different things. I focused on my foundation. He focused on his empire. We lived parallel lives that rarely intersected except on paper. And now? Now I'm focused on rebuilding everything that was destroyed and making sure people understand that women who stand up to powerful men aren't weak. They're warriors. The interview continued for another 40 minutes. Michaela asked about the Foundation's mission, about Zariah's plans moving forward, about her relationship with Cassius. That last question landed differently. Cassius Kane is someone who saw me when I was invisible, Zariah said carefully, who valued my work when others dismissed it, who stood beside me when standing alone would have been easier. Is it true you're in a relationship? Zariah met the reporter's eyes directly. It's true that I'm finally in a relationship built on mutual respect instead of possession. Michaela smiled slightly. That's a good quote. When the interview ended, they shook hands and Michaela promised to send a draft before publication. Zariah knew that promise meant nothing. Reporters protected their sources, not their subjects. But the gesture felt reassuring anyway. Outside, Cassius stood leaning against the Audi with his arms crossed, looking every inch the dangerous lieutenant he used to be. How'd it go? He asked as she approached. Either really well, or I just destroyed both our lives. Guess we'll find out. They drove back to the loft in comfortable silence. Zariah stared out the window watching Chicago pass by. The city that had been her home for 8 years. The place where she built everything and lost everything, and now had to decide whether to rebuild or run. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. She opened it. The message contained 3 words and a photograph. "You'll regret this." The photo showed the exterior of the Bennett Horizon Foundation's second location, a community center in Inglewood that ran after-school programs and job training workshops. The building was still standing, but the message was clear. Zariah's hands started shaking. "Cassius." Something in her voice made him immediately pull over onto the shoulder. He looked at the phone screen, and his expression went cold. "That's the Inglewood site," he said. "I know." "He's escalating." "I know." Cassius pulled back into traffic, driving faster now, his jaw clenched tight. "We need protection," he said. "Real protection. I'm calling Marcus." "Marcus who?" "Marcus Washington, former Marine, current head of private security for people who need real defense. He's expensive, but worth it." Zariah barely heard him. Her mind was racing through options, contingencies, worst-case scenarios. If Damien hit the Inglewood Center, dozens of kids would lose their safe space. Families would lose access to resources. An entire community would suffer because she dared to leave a man who never valued her anyway. The guilt felt crushing. "This is my fault," she whispered. Cassius's head snapped toward her. "Don't do that. People are going to get hurt because of me. People are going to get hurt because Damien Moretti is a narcissistic sociopath who can't handle rejection. That's not on you, Zariah. That's on him." But the logic didn't touch the guilt. Back at the loft, Cassius immediately started making calls. Security experts, former colleagues still loyal to him instead of Damien. People who understood the kind of war they were walking into. Zariah sat on the sofa with her laptop, watching donation numbers continue climbing. $47,000 raised in less than 24 hours. Messages of support flooding her inbox from people across the country who believed in the Foundation's mission. But beneath the gratitude, terror hummed. Because Damien didn't just want her gone, he wanted her erased. And the difference between those two things was the difference between running and surviving. Her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number. Valentina Cruz. Zariah almost didn't answer, but curiosity outweighed caution. "Hello?" "Zariah, it's Valentina." The supermodel's voice carried an accent that made even simple words sound elegant. "I know. I need to tell you something." Zariah waited. "Damien called me this morning. He was drunk, furious. He said things about you." Valentina paused. "Terrible things. Things that made me realize I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "Believing him when he said you were weak." "You're not weak, Zariah. You're the strongest woman I've ever seen, and I'm sorry I participated in hurting you." The apology landed unexpectedly. "Why are you telling me this?" Zariah asked. "Because you should know, Damien isn't finished. He's planning something bigger. I don't know what exactly, but I heard him on the phone with someone named Vincent. They were talking about making sure you understand your place." Ice slid down Zariah's spine. Vincent D'Angelo, Damien's enforcer. The man who made problems disappear. "Thank you for telling me," Zariah said quietly. "Be careful, please." The line went dead. Zariah sat staring at her phone while her heart hammered against her ribs. Cassius appeared in front of her, crouching down so they were eye level. "Talk to me," he said gently. So she told him about Valentina's call, about Vincent D'Angelo, about the threat growing larger with every passing hour. When she finished, Cassius's expression had gone flat and cold, the face of a man making calculations that involved violence. "We end this," he said simply. "How?" "We give Damien exactly what he wants." Zariah's confusion must have shown on her face because Cassius continued. "He wants you gone, disappeared, out of his life. So we make him think he won. We leak information that you're leaving Chicago, moving across the country, abandoning the Foundation. That's giving up. That's strategy. We make him lower his guard. Then we hit back harder than he's expecting." Zariah studied his face, seeing the military training beneath the criminal veneer, the tactical mind that made him valuable to Damien for 15 years. "What exactly are we hitting him with?" she asked. Cassius's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything." They spent the next 72 hours building the trap. Cassius leaked information through carefully selected sources that Zariah was planning to relocate to Seattle, start fresh, leave Chicago behind. He made sure the rumors reached Damien through multiple channels, building credibility through repetition. Meanwhile, Zariah worked with Marcus Washington, a brick wall of a man with close-cropped hair and eyes that tracked threats like targeting systems, to secure both Foundation locations. Private security guards, surveillance cameras, perimeter alarms. The Englewood Center turned into a fortress overnight. The Chicago Tribune article dropped on Tuesday morning. The headline read, "Phoenix Rising, Zariah Bennett's Fight to Rebuild After Devastating Fire." The piece was fair, balanced, and devastating. Michaela quoted Zariah extensively about the Foundation's mission, about community transformation, about powerful men trying to silence strong women. She stopped short of directly accusing Damien of arson, but the implications hung heavy between every paragraph. Within hours, the article went viral. Shares exploded across social media. Other news outlets picked up the story. By afternoon, Zariah's Foundation donations had climbed past $200,000. That same afternoon, Zariah received a visitor. Marcus buzzed up from the lobby. "Woman here to see you, says her name is Elena Moretti." Zariah froze. Damien's mother. Cassius immediately moved toward the door, his body language shifting into protection mode. "Send her up," Zariah said. "Zariah, she's 70 years old and half Damien's size. I think we're safe." Marcus sent Elena up. The woman who emerged from the elevator looked exactly like her photographs. Silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Expensive black dress. Pearls that probably cost more than most cars. But her eyes carried something photographs never captured. Sadness so deep it had worn grooves into her face. "Mrs. Moretti," Zariah said carefully. "Please, call me Elena." Her voice carried a faint Italian accent softened by decades in America. "May I come in?" Zariah stepped aside. Elena entered the loft and immediately spotted Cassius standing near the kitchen with his arms crossed. Recognition flickered across her face. "Cassius, I should have known you'd be here." "Mrs. Moretti." His tone carried respect but no warmth. Elena turned back to Zariah. "I read the article in the Tribune, and I came to apologize." "For what?" "For my son." Elena's eyes filled with something between grief and rage. "For the man I raised. For the monster he became." She moved to the windows overlooking the river, and for a moment she just stared out at the city. "Damien's father was a hard man," Elena said quietly. "Cruel. He taught our son that power matters more than people, that love is weakness, that women exist to serve. I tried to teach him differently, but—" Her voice cracked. "A mother's love is no match for a father's brutality." Zariah felt something twist in her chest. "I watched you beside my son for 3 years," Elena continued. "Watched you make yourself smaller. Watched you try so hard to earn affection from someone incapable of giving it. And I said nothing because I learned long ago that speaking up only makes things worse." She turned to face Zariah fully. "But I'm speaking up now. What Damien did to your Foundation, what he's planning to do next, it's unconscionable, and I won't be silent anymore." "What is he planning?" Cassius asked sharply. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. "Financial records, shell companies, money laundering operations, offshore accounts, everything the FBI would need to build a case against my son." The room went completely still. "Why are you doing this?" Zariah whispered. Elena's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Because I'm tired of watching men destroy everything beautiful. Because you deserved better than what my son gave you. Because maybe, just maybe, if I can stop him from destroying you, I can finally forgive myself for all the times I stayed silent before." She pressed the flash drive into Zariah's hand. "Use this wisely. And please, be careful. Damien has nothing left to lose now. That makes him more dangerous than ever." Elena left as quietly as she arrived. Zariah stood holding the flash drive like it might detonate in her palm. Cassius crossed the room and took it gently from her hands. "This changes everything," he said. "This is his mother turning against him. This is justice." But Zariah knew better. This wasn't justice. This was war. And they had just been handed the nuclear option. The question was whether they were willing to use it. That night, Zariah couldn't sleep. She lay in Cassius's bed, their bed, she supposed, though the possessive still felt strange, staring at ceiling shadows cast by city lights filtering through the windows. Beside her, Cassius's breathing came slow and steady, but she knew he wasn't sleeping either. His hand rested on her hip, thumb tracing small circles through the fabric of the borrowed t-shirt she wore. "You awake?" she whispered. "Yeah. What happens if we actually do this? If we give that flash drive to the FBI?" Cassius shifted to face her in the darkness. "Damien goes to prison. For a long time. Maybe forever. And you?" "I'll probably go down too. I've been part of his operation for 15 years, Zariah. My hands aren't clean." Her chest constricted. "Then we can't do it." "Yes, we can. I won't let you sacrifice yourself, It's not sacrifice if I'm choosing it willingly." His hand cupped her face gently. "I've spent 15 years building something rotten. Maybe it's time I tear it down. There has to be another way." "There isn't. Not if we want to end this permanently." Zariah's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "I just got you," she whispered. "I can't lose you already." Cassius pulled her closer until her head rested against his chest, and she could hear his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. "You're not going to lose me," he said softly. "But we have to be smart, strategic. We don't just hand over the flash drive. We use it as leverage. We negotiate immunity for me in exchange for testimony against Damien." "Will the FBI agree to that?" "If the evidence is good enough, yes." Zariah closed her eyes and let herself believe it might work. They fell asleep tangled together while Chicago hummed outside the windows, and the flash drive sat on the nightstand like a loaded gun waiting to fire. The phone call came at 4 a.m. Zariah jerked awake to her phone vibrating violently against the nightstand. She grabbed it without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" "Zariah." Marcus Washington's voice came through clipped and urgent. "We have a situation at the Englewood Center." Ice flooded her veins. "What kind of situation?" "3 armed men tried to break in 20 minutes ago. My team intercepted. There was gunfire. No casualties on our side, but the police are on scene and asking questions." Cassius was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with military efficiency. "Are the intruders in custody?" Zariah asked. "2 are. 1 escaped." "Did they say who sent them?" "They're not talking, but we both know who sent them." "Yes, they did." Zariah hung up and started dressing in yesterday's clothes with shaking hands. "We need to get to Englewood," she said. "Not we. You're staying here." "The hell I am. That's my foundation, my responsibility." "And if Damien is hoping you'll show up so he can finish what he started?" The question hung between them. "Then I guess we find out whether your security team is as good as you claim," Zariah said. Cassius looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he grabbed his keys. They drove through empty pre-dawn streets with Marcus providing updates over the phone. By the time they arrived at the Englewood Center, police cars had turned the block into a light show of red and blue strobes. Zariah stepped out of the Audi and immediately spotted the bullet holes in the center's front door. Her stomach dropped. This was real. Not abstract threats or strategic maneuvering. Real violence. Real bullets. Real people who could have died protecting a building she cared about. A detective approached, middle-aged black woman with tired eyes and a wedding ring worn thin from years of wear. "You Zariah Bennett?" the detective asked. "Yes." "Detective Sandra Morrison. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here tonight." They talked for 40 minutes while crime scene techs photographed evidence and uniformed officers secured the perimeter. Zariah explained the Foundation's mission, the recent fire, the escalating threats. She stopped short of naming Damien directly, but Detective Morrison wasn't stupid. "You understand," Morrison said carefully, "that if you're involved with certain individuals who operate outside the law, this isn't going to end until either you remove yourself from the situation or someone ends up dead." "I'm trying to remove myself. That's why this is happening. Morrison studied her face for a long moment. How well do you know Cassius Kane? The question felt loaded. Well enough. He's been on our radar for years. Moretti's right hand. Smart, dangerous, loyal. Was loyal, Zariah corrected. Not anymore. Morrison's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's interesting. Why? Because men like Kane don't usually break ranks unless they have a very good reason, and men like Moretti don't usually let betrayal slide without consequences. She handed Zariah a business card. If you decide you want to talk, really talk, about what's happening, call me. I can help. But only if you're willing to help yourself. Zariah took the card. Morrison walked away, leaving Zariah standing in front of a building pocked with bullet holes while the sun started rising over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that felt obscene given the circumstances. Cassius appeared beside her. We need to move, he said quietly. Where? Somewhere Damien can't find us. Somewhere we can think. Zariah looked at the Inglewood Center one more time. The building that represented hope for dozens of families, that provided safety for kids who had none, that existed because she believed people deserved better than what they were given. Then she thought about the flash drive containing evidence that could destroy Damien Moretti permanently. Okay, she said. They climbed back into the Audi and drove away while police lights still painted the street in emergency colors. And Zariah realized with crystal clarity that they had just crossed the point of no return. Because Damien wouldn't stop now, not until she was erased completely, which meant she had to erase him first, or die trying. They drove north out of Chicago with dawn bleeding across the skyline behind them, turning glass towers into mirrors that reflected nothing but escape. Cassius kept his speed steady at 75, fast enough to put distance between them and the bullet-riddled Inglewood Center, but not so fast they'd attract highway patrol attention. His hands gripped the steering wheel with the white-knuckled tension of a man who understood exactly how badly things were unraveling. Zariah sat in the passenger seat staring at Detective Morrison's business card like it might transform into something useful if she looked hard enough. The embossed letters felt sharp beneath her thumb. Chicago Police Department, Organized Crime Division, a lifeline disguised as cardstock. Her phone buzzed for the 100th time that morning. Marcus Washington. Updates on the Inglewood Center. The two captured intruders were refusing to talk, lawyered up before police could finish reading their rights. The third remained missing, probably bleeding out in some sympathetic emergency room or already across state lines. The bullet holes in the center's front door would cost $14,000 to repair. Insurance wouldn't cover domestic terrorism, which apparently was how they were classifying targeted attacks on nonprofit organizations. Zariah turned off her phone. Where are we going? She asked quietly. Lake House, about 2 hours from the city. Used to belong to my grandfather before he died. It's off the grid, paid for in cash decades ago, no paper trail connecting it to me or the Moretti organization. So we're hiding. We're regrouping. The distinction felt thin. They drove in silence for another 40 minutes before Cassius spoke again. We need to make a decision about the flash drive. Zariah had been trying not to think about Elena Moretti's gift sitting in Cassius's jacket pocket like a bomb with an unstable timer. Financial records documenting 15 years of organized crime. Evidence that could bury Damien permanently, but would almost certainly drag Cassius down with him. What if we don't use it? She said. What if we just disappear? Move somewhere Damien can't reach us. Cassius's laugh came out harsh and bitter. You think there's somewhere Damien Moretti can't reach? He has connections in 14 countries, Zariah. Shell corporations in the Caymans, cartel partnerships in Mexico, politicians on 3 continents who owe him favors. Running doesn't work when the person chasing you has unlimited resources. Then what's the alternative? We destroy him before he destroys us. The words settled into the car like smoke from a gun barrel. Zariah turned to face him fully. If we turn over that flash drive, you go to prison. You know that, right? Even with immunity deals and cooperation agreements, you've been his second in command for 15 years. They'll want your testimony, but they'll also want accountability. I know. So you're willing to sacrifice your freedom to stop him? Cassius's jaw tightened. I'm willing to sacrifice my freedom to save you. Her chest constricted painfully. That's not your choice to make, she whispered. Yes, it is. Because I made it the night I stood in front of Chicago's criminal elite and told them I love you. There's no walking that back, Zariah. Damien will keep coming until one of us is dead or in prison. Those are the only endings this story has. The truth of it felt suffocating. They exited the highway onto a two-lane road that cut through farmland and forest, civilization thinning into something rural and isolated. The lake house appeared 20 minutes later, a modest A-frame tucked between oak trees with a dock extending into gray water that looked cold enough to stop a heart. Cassius parked behind the house where the Audi couldn't be seen from the road. They climbed out into morning air that smelled like pine and impending rain. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. 70s-era furniture covered in dust sheets. Floral wallpaper faded to sepia. A stone fireplace that probably hadn't seen fire in a decade. But the electricity worked when Cassius flipped the breaker, and the plumbing groaned to life after a few concerning noises. Zariah collapsed onto the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, with exhaustion crashing over her in waves. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in the past 72. Her body felt heavy, disconnected, like she was operating on autopilot while her actual consciousness floated somewhere outside herself, watching everything fall apart. Cassius disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 bottles of water and a box of crackers he found in the pantry. They ate in silence while gray light filtered through dusty windows. "We should call Detective Morrison," Zariah said finally. "Not yet." "Cassius, if we bring the police into this before we have a solid strategy, we lose control of the narrative. Damien will lawyer up, tie everything in legal knots for years, and we'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders waiting for the next attack. So what's the alternative? We leak the information ourselves, selectively, to journalists, to federal investigators, to people who can build cases without relying on local police who might be on Damien's payroll." Zariah's head throbbed. "That's going to take time we don't have." "Then we buy time." "How?" Cassius pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. The call connected after 3 rings. "It's Kane," he said. "I need a meeting with Vincent." Zariah's blood went cold. Vincent D'Angelo, Damien's enforcer, the man who made problems disappear permanently. Cassius was setting up a meeting with the person most likely to kill them both. He hung up and met Zariah's horrified stare. "Trust me," he said quietly. "You're insane." "Probably. But Vincent and I go back 20 years. We were soldiers together before Damien recruited us. He owes me. People like Vincent don't honor debts. They honor power. Then I'll make him understand there's more power in siding with us than staying loyal to a sinking ship." The phone buzzed with a return text. Cassius read it, and his expression darkened. "Vincent wants to meet tonight. Warehouse in Gary, Indiana. 9 o'clock. Gary, Indiana. Abandoned industrial wasteland perfect for bodies that needed to disappear." "This is a trap," Zariah said. "Of course it's a trap. But it's also an opportunity. To die. To negotiate." She wanted to scream, wanted to grab his shoulders and shake sense into him. But exhaustion made everything feel distant and muted, like she was experiencing the conversation through 6 inches of water. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not. If you're walking into a potential execution, I'm not letting you do it alone." "Zariah." "This isn't negotiable, Cassius. We're in this together, or we're not in it at all." His expression cycled through frustration and resignation before settling on grim acceptance. "Fine. But you stay in the car. If shooting starts, you drive away and don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are. Because someone needs to survive this to make sure Damien actually pays for what he's done." The logic was sound, even if it felt like swallowing glass. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Cassius cleaned his Glock with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Zariah called Marcus Washington and updated him on their location, establishing a check-in protocol. If they didn't contact him by 10:30 that night, he had instructions to deliver copies of the flash drive contents to the FBI, the Chicago Tribune, and 3 different federal prosecutors. A dead man's switch built from paranoia and necessity. At 7:30, they climbed back into the Audi and started driving toward Indiana. The warehouse squatted in Gary's industrial district like a corpse no one bothered burying. Rust consumed the corrugated metal walls. Windows shattered decades ago let weather and wildlife colonize the interior. Graffiti covered every surface in layers of paint that documented generations of decay. Cassius parked 50 yards away behind a collapsed grain silo that blocked them from the warehouse's direct line of sight. "Stay here," he said, checking his gun one final time. "Engine running, doors locked. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, or if you hear gunfire, you leave." Zariah wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. Fear tasted metallic and thick. Cassius leaned across the center console and kissed her. Not gentle, hard and desperate, the kiss of a man who understood this might be the last time. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "Don't you dare die." "I'll do my best." Then he climbed out and walked toward the warehouse, with his hands visible and empty, the gun tucked in the small of his back beneath his jacket. Zariah watched him disappear through the warehouse's gaping entrance, and her heart tried to climb out of her chest. She counted seconds. 60. 120. 3 minutes. At 4 minutes, her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Come inside, Zariah, we're all waiting." Her stomach dropped. This was wrong. All of it. Cassius wouldn't have invited her inside unless something had gone catastrophically sideways. She looked at the warehouse entrance, then at the steering wheel, then at Detective Morrison's business card still sitting in the cup holder. Every instinct screamed to drive away, but Cassius was inside. She killed the engine and climbed out. The warehouse interior smelled like rust and rotting wood and something organic that might have been dead rats or dead dreams. Gray light filtered through holes in the roof, creating columns of illumination that turned dust motes into drifting constellations. Cassius stood in the center of the space with his hands raised, his gun on the concrete floor 10 feet away. Vincent D'Angelo stood behind him with a pistol pressed against the base of Cassius's skull. But worse, far worse, Damian Moretti leaned against a support column 30 feet away, watching everything with the satisfied expression of a man who just won a game he'd been playing for months. Zariah froze. "There she is," Damian said warmly, like greeting an old friend. "The woman who thought she could burn down my empire and walk away clean." "Let him go," Zariah said, her voice barely steady. "Why would I do that? Cassius betrayed me. You betrayed me. Betrayal requires consequences." Vincent pressed the gun harder against Cassius's skull. Cassius's eyes found Zariah's across the warehouse, and the apology in them felt bottomless. "This was always the plan, wasn't it?" Zariah said, pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. "You knew we'd run. You knew we'd reach out to Vincent. You've been 3 steps ahead the entire time." Damian smiled. "Of course I have. You're not the strategic mastermind you think you are, Zariah. You're predictable, emotional. You follow your heart instead of your head, which makes you incredibly easy to manipulate." He pushed off the column and walked closer, his footsteps echoing against concrete. "Did you really think I'd let you walk away? That I'd just accept divorce papers and move on? You don't leave Damian Moretti. You stay until I decide you're no longer useful. And you, my dear wife, stopped being useful the moment you embarrassed me at the Belladonna Gala." Zariah's hands clenched into fists. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Obedience, respect. For you to remember your place." "My place is anywhere but beside you." Damian's expression flickered, not anger, but something colder. Calculation. "Then I suppose we're at an impasse, because I can't let you live knowing what you know about my operations, and I certainly can't let Cassius live after what he did." Vincent's finger tightened on the trigger. "Wait," Zariah said desperately. "I'll give you what you want, the flash drive, all of it. Elena's evidence, the financial records, everything. Just let him go." Damian's eyebrows lifted. "My mother gave you evidence against me? How delightfully Shakespearean. It's in a safe location. You kill us, and it gets delivered to the FBI automatically. I'm aware. Marcus Washington's dead man's switch. Very clever." The casual confirmation hit like a punch to the sternum. "How she?" "Did I know?" "Because Vincent has been feeding me information about your movement since the moment Cassius reached out to him. Every plan, every strategy, every desperate contingency you've built, I've known about it before you finished implementing it." Zariah looked at Vincent, and the man's expression revealed nothing, just cold professionalism. "You used our friendship," Cassius said, his voice tight with fury. 20 years of brotherhood, and you sold me out." "Brotherhood doesn't pay my mortgage," Vincent replied flatly. Loyalty to Damien does. The betrayal felt absolute. So what happens now? Zariah asked. You kill us both and hope your lawyers can handle the fallout when Marcus delivers the evidence? Actually, Damien said, I have a better plan. He pulled out his phone and made a call. It connected immediately. Bring her in, he said. Footsteps echoed from the warehouse's rear entrance. 3 men emerged from the shadows, escorting someone with a black hood over their head, hands zip-tied behind their back. They shoved the person forward and ripped off the hood. Zariah's entire world stopped. Michaela Torres, the Tribune reporter who interviewed her, who wrote the article that went viral, who believed in the Foundation's mission. Blood streaked down the side of Michaela's face from a cut above her eyebrow. Her eyes were wild with terror. What the hell did you do? Zariah breathed. Leverage, Damien said simply. You care about people, Zariah. It's your greatest weakness. So here's the new deal. You publicly recant everything you said in that Tribune article. You issue a statement saying you lied about me, that you were bitter about the divorce, that the Foundation fire was accidental. You dissolve the Bennett Horizon Foundation permanently, and you disappear from Chicago forever. And if I don't? Damien nodded toward Michaela. Then Ms. Torres becomes a tragic case of investigative journalism gone wrong. Wrong neighborhood, wrong questions, wrong time. These things happen in Chicago. Michaela's eyes locked onto Zariah's, pleading silently. You're insane, Cassius said. I'm thorough. Damien checked his watch. You have 60 seconds to decide, Zariah. Agree to my terms, and everyone walks out of here alive. Refuse, and I start with the reporter. One of the men holding Michaela pulled out a knife. Zariah's mind raced through options, contingencies, escape routes. They all ended the same way, with bodies and regret. 50 seconds, Damien said. Don't do it, Cassius said urgently. If you give in to this, he owns you forever. If I don't, she dies. She signed up for this risk when she became a crime reporter. I didn't ask for her consent to become collateral damage in my war. Zariah's voice cracked. I'm not letting someone else die because I was stupid enough to believe I could fight back. 40 seconds. Zariah looked at Michaela, young, terrified, bleeding. Looked at Cassius with a gun against his skull and betrayal carved into every line of his face. Looked at Damien standing there with the satisfied expression of a man who just checkmated a game his opponent didn't even realize they were playing. She thought about the Foundation, about the 3,000 students who graduated because of her work, about the communities transformed, about the life she built from nothing when everyone told her she wasn't enough. Then she thought about what survival actually cost. 30 seconds. Okay, Zariah whispered. Zariah, no. Okay, louder this time, cutting through Cassius's protest. I'll do it, all of it. The recantation, the statement, dissolving the Foundation, just let them go. Damien's smile widened. Smart girl, though I have to say I expected you to hold out longer. I'm tired of people getting hurt because of me. A noble sentiment. Unfortunately, there's one more condition I forgot to mention. Ice slid down Zariah's spine. What condition? Cassius still has to die. The words landed like bullets. No! Zariah lurched forward, but 2 of Damien's men grabbed her arms, holding her in place. You said everyone walks out alive. I said everyone walks out alive if you agree to my terms, but Cassius betrayed me. That particular sin requires blood payment. Cassius's expression went flat and cold, the face of a man accepting his execution. Don't, he said quietly, looking at Zariah. Don't let him see you break. Vincent pressed the gun harder against Cassius's skull. Zariah thrashed against the men holding her, desperation turning into something feral and uncontrollable. Please, she begged, the word tearing out of her throat like shrapnel. Please don't do this. Kill me instead. Let him live. I'll give you anything. Your desperation is noted, Damien said, but this isn't negotiable. He nodded at Vincent. The enforcer's finger moved toward the trigger, and in that crystallized moment before everything shattered, Zariah understood with perfect clarity that Damien Moretti didn't just want to win. He wanted to destroy her so completely that nothing remained. Not her foundation, not her reputation, not even her ability to love. Then 3 things happened simultaneously. Michaela Torres drove her elbow backward into her captor's stomach with enough force to make him double over. Cassius dropped suddenly, yanking Vincent off balance, and the warehouse's front entrance exploded inward as tactical teams in FBI jackets swarmed through every opening. "Federal agents! On the ground! Now!" Gunfire erupted. Vincent's shot went wide, missing Cassius's head by inches and punching through rusted metal with a sound like thunder trapped in a cage. The men holding Zariah released her to reach for their weapons, but tactical teams hit them before they cleared leather. Bodies slammed into concrete. Zip ties materialized with professional efficiency. Zariah dropped to her knees, her entire body shaking so violently she couldn't stand. Cassius scrambled toward her, bleeding from somewhere, she couldn't tell where, and pulled her against his chest. "I've got you," he gasped. "I've got you." Through the chaos, Zariah watched federal agents drag Damian Moretti to the ground, his face pressed against dirty concrete while someone read him his rights in a voice that carried the weight of inevitable justice. Vincent D'Angelo went down fighting. Took 3 agents to subdue him while he screamed about lawyers and jurisdiction and entrapment. Detective Morrison emerged from the tactical unit with her weapon still drawn and her expression grim. She holstered her gun and crouched beside Zariah and Cassius. "You two okay?" she asked. Zariah couldn't speak, just nodded while her entire nervous system tried to process that they were still alive. "How, Cassius started. "Your friend Marcus Washington called us 6 hours ago, said you were walking into a trap, and that if we wanted Damian Moretti, tonight was our shot. We've been positioning tactical teams around this warehouse since 4 o'clock. She stood and offered Zariah her hand. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Zariah let Morrison pull her to her feet. Cassius stood beside her, his arm wrapped around her waist like letting go meant drowning. They walked out of the warehouse into cool night air that tasted like freedom and survived catastrophe. Behind them, federal agents loaded Damian Moretti into an armored transport vehicle. He looked at Zara through the window with an expression of pure distilled hatred. She held his gaze until the transport pulled away. The FBI field office in Chicago smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucratic exhaustion. Zariah sat in an interview room with gray walls and fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead. Cassius sat beside her, their hands intertwined beneath the metal table. Detective Morrison and a federal prosecutor named Catherine Chen spent 4 hours asking questions, taking statements, building timelines. Every detail documented, every conversation recorded. Michaela Torres sat in an adjacent interview room, getting medical attention and providing her own statement about kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. As dawn light started bleeding through the building's windows, Chen finally closed her legal pad. "Okay," she said. "Here's where we are. Damian Moretti is being charged with conspiracy to commit arson, attempted murder, kidnapping, witness tampering, and about 40 counts of racketeering and money laundering. The flash drive Elena Moretti provided gives us enough evidence to build a case that could put him away for multiple lifetimes." "What about Cassius?" Zariah asked. Chen's expression softened slightly. "Zariah, Mr. Kane has agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation. In exchange for his testimony, we're offering a plea deal. 5 years in minimum security, eligible for parole in 3. 5 years. The number felt simultaneously massive and impossibly small. "When?" Zariah's voice barely made it across the table. "He'll surrender himself Monday morning." 3 days. Zariah's grip on Cassius's hand tightened until her knuckles went white. "Can we have a minute?" Cassius asked. Chen and Morrison exchanged glances, then stood. 5 minutes, Morrison said. "Then we need final signatures." They left. The door clicked shut. Zariah turned to face Cassius fully, and the tears she had been holding back for hours finally broke through. 5 years, she whispered. "I know. I know." He pulled her into his arms and she collapsed against him, her entire body shaking with sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. "I just got you," she gasped between breaths. "I just finally found someone who sees me, and now—" "Hey." He tilted her face up gently. 5 years isn't forever. It's just time. And time passes whether we're together or apart. But nothing. You're going to rebuild that foundation. You're going to transform more communities. You're going to become exactly who you were always meant to be before Damien convinced you that you were small. His thumb wiped away her tears. And when I get out, you're going to still be there, still fighting, still brilliant, still the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. What if you change? Her voice broke. What if 5 years in prison turns you into someone different? Then you'll love whoever I become, because that's what real love does. The simplicity of it made her chest ache. Morrison knocked on the door. Time's up. They stood together. Cassius signed papers. Zariah signed papers. Legal language transforming lived experience into prosecutable fact. Outside, morning light turned Chicago into something golden and new. They stood on the federal building steps while the city woke up around them. Commuters rushing to work, pigeons fighting over discarded food, the eternal rhythm of urban survival. 3 days, Cassius said. We have 3 days before I surrender. How do you want to spend them? Zariah thought about everything they had been through. The violence, the betrayal, the terror of watching someone she loved with a gun pressed against his skull. Then she thought about what they survived. Together, she said simply. I want to spend them together. He smiled, real, warm, alive. They walked to the Audi parked in the federal building garage, climbed inside, drove through Chicago's streets toward Cassius's loft, while the city moved around them indifferent and eternal. And for 3 days, they pretended the world outside didn't exist. They cooked meals that burned because neither was paying attention, stayed in bed until afternoon talking about futures that suddenly felt possible, made love with the desperate intensity of people trying to memorize every touch before memory was all they had left. On the third night, they lay tangled together while rain hammered the windows and Chicago glittered below. I'm going to wait for you, Zariah whispered into the darkness. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you waited for me when I was disappearing beside someone else. Now it's my turn. Cassius pulled her closer. 5 years, he said. 5 years, she agreed. And when Monday morning arrived with all its terrible inevitability, they drove to the federal detention center together, stood in the parking lot holding each other like letting go meant dying. I love you, Cassius said. I love you too. He kissed her one final time. Then he walked through the detention center doors and disappeared into processing. Zariah stood alone in the parking lot while her entire world rearranged itself around a 5-year absence. But she didn't break, because Zariah Bennett had survived 3 years beside a man who tried to erase her. She could survive 5 years waiting for someone who actually saw her. The question was whether she would still recognize herself when the waiting finally ended. Zariah stood in the federal detention center parking lot long after Cassius disappeared through the steel doors, her breath forming small clouds in the October air, while her heart tried to remember how to beat without him. The city noise felt distant, cars passing, sirens wailing somewhere downtown, the eternal hum of Chicago indifferent to individual suffering. She counted to 100 before her legs finally remembered how to move. The drive back to the loft felt longer than it should have. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every familiar landmark looked wrong, like the city had shifted 2 degrees off its axis while she wasn't paying attention. Inside the loft, Cassius's presence hung everywhere. His coffee mug still sat in the sink, his jacket draped over the back of the leather chair. The bed unmade from their last morning together, sheets still tangled from bodies that tried to memorize each other before memory was all they had left. Zariah stripped the bed mechanically and threw everything into the washing machine, then stood in the bathroom doorway staring at nothing until her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Washington. I'm downstairs. We need to talk. She rode the elevator down to find Marcus leaning against his truck with his arms crossed, looking like a man who hadn't slept in 72 hours, which he probably hadn't. You okay? He asked. No. Good. At least you're honest. He handed her a manila envelope thick with documents. Insurance payout for the Inglewood Center came through, $340,000. Combined with the crowdfunding donations, you're sitting on close to $600,000 in rebuilding capital. The numbers felt abstract, disconnected from reality. The original headquarters location is still available, Marcus continued. Owners willing to sell at pre-fire market value if you move fast. But Zariah, he paused, choosing words carefully. You need to decide if rebuilding is what you actually want, or if you're just going through motions because you don't know what else to do. The question hit harder than intended. What else would I do? She asked quietly. Live, breathe, exist for 5 minutes without carrying the weight of everyone else's survival on your shoulders. That's not who I am. Maybe it should be, for a while. They stood in silence while traffic moved past on the street behind them. Damien's arraignment is Thursday, Marcus said finally. Federal prosecutor thinks he'll plead not guilty, try to drag this out for years. But with Elena's evidence and Cassius's testimony, they're confident about conviction. What about Vincent? Cut a deal already? 20 years? Eligible for parole in 12. He's testifying against Damien in exchange for reduced sentencing. Zariah thought about Vincent, the man who pretended to help while feeding information to their enemy, who stood with a gun pressed against Cassius's skull, ready to execute someone he called brother for 20 years. I hope he rots, she said flatly. Marcus nodded. He will. Prison doesn't treat rats kindly. He climbed into his truck, then paused with the door open. For what it's worth, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Not because you don't break, everyone breaks, but because you break and then get up anyway. He drove off before she could respond. Tapes. The weeks blurred together in a haze of legal consultations and foundation rebuilding, and nights spent alone in a loft that felt too big without Cassius filling the space with his presence. Detective Morrison called twice a week with updates on the case against Damien. The charges kept multiplying: conspiracy, racketeering, witness tampering, attempted murder. The prosecutor's office was building something massive, comprehensive, designed to ensure Damien Moretti never walked free again. Zariah testified before a grand jury in November, spent 6 hours answering questions about her marriage, about the foundation, about watching her life's work burn while the man who claimed to love her orchestrated her destruction from behind lawyers and shell corporations. The grand jury indicted within 48 hours. Michaela Torres published a follow-up article in the Tribune, How I Survived Being Kidnapped by Chicago's Most Dangerous Crime Boss. The piece went viral immediately. National news outlets picked it up. CNN interviewed Zariah remotely about domestic violence and organized crime marriages. She sat under studio lights answering questions while her insides screamed. By December, the Bennett Horizon Foundation had purchased and renovated the original headquarters location. The grand reopening happened on a Saturday morning with 200 community members in attendance, local politicians giving speeches about resilience, and news cameras documenting Zariah cutting the ribbon on a building that rose from literal ashes. She smiled for photographs and shook hands and gave interviews about perseverance, then went home and cried in the shower until the water ran cold. Christmas arrived with brutal efficiency. Zariah visited Cassius at the Federal Detention Center, 45 minutes separated by bulletproof glass and monitored phone calls where everything important went unsaid because guards were listening. He looked thinner, tired, but his eyes still lit up when he saw her. "You look good," he said through the phone. Liar. "Okay, you look exhausted, but still beautiful." She pressed her palm against the glass. He mirrored the gesture on his side, their hands separated by a quarter-inch of polymer that might as well have been the Grand Canyon. "Trial starts in March," she said. "Prosecutor thinks it'll last 6 weeks. You testifying?" "First week. They want to establish the pattern of abuse, the foundation fire, everything." Cassius's jaw tightened. "You don't have to do this. You've already given enough statements." "I want to. I need him to hear me say it in open court, where he can't interrupt or dismiss or pretend I don't exist." "He's going to have his lawyers tear you apart on cross-examination." "Let them try." Something shifted in his expression, pride mixed with concern. 5 months down, he said quietly. 55 to go. The math felt crushing. "I'm counting," Zariah whispered. The guard called time. Their 45 minutes evaporated like they never existed. Zariah walked out of the detention center into Chicago winter with wind cutting through her coat like razors. She sat in her car for 20 minutes before her hands stopped shaking enough to drive. January brought subpoenas and preparation sessions with Catherine Chen's prosecution team. They grilled Zariah for hours, preparing her for every possible attack Damien's defense would launch. They role-played cross-examination until she could recite her testimony in her sleep. He's going to try to make you seem vindictive, Chen warned. A scorned wife lying to destroy her husband's reputation. Let him try. He's going to bring up the foundation donations, suggest you orchestrated everything for publicity. My headquarters burned down, Catherine. Bullets went through the Englewood Center. Michaela Torres got kidnapped. What part of that sounds like publicity stunt? Chen smiled grimly. Just making sure you're ready. February turned Chicago into a frozen hellscape. Zariah threw herself into foundation work with manic intensity, 16-hour days, expansion plans for 3 new locations, a scholarship program targeting formerly incarcerated individuals trying to rebuild their lives. She hired 12 new staff members, including a director of operations, so she could finally delegate responsibilities that had been drowning her for years. The foundation flourished. Zariah withered. She lost 15 pounds she didn't have to lose, stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night, existed on coffee and adrenaline and the grim determination to survive until Cassius came home. Valentina Cruz called one night in late February. Zariah almost didn't answer, but exhaustion made her reckless. I saw the news about the trial, Valentina said without preamble. I wanted to see if you're okay. Why do you care? Because I participated in hurting you, and I've spent 6 months trying to figure out how to apologize for being stupid enough to believe Damien when he said you were nothing. Zariah sat down on the sofa, too tired to stay angry. You didn't know, she said. I should have. I've dated enough powerful men to recognize the pattern, but I wanted to believe he was different, that I was special enough to be the exception. You weren't the exception. Neither was I. Damien doesn't do exceptions. He does possessions. Silence stretched across the line. For what it's worth, Valentina said finally, you're extraordinary, and I hope you destroy him in court. That's the plan. They talked for another 20 minutes, 2 women connected by the same man's cruelty, finding unexpected solidarity in shared survival. When they hung up, Zariah felt fractionally less alone. The trial began on March 3rd. United States versus Damien Moretti. Federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, courtroom packed with journalists, curious observers, and family members of Damien's various victims over the years. Security was intense. Metal detectors, armed guards, federal marshals positioned at every entrance. Zariah arrived 40 minutes early wearing a navy suit that made her look professional and untouchable. She sat in the witness waiting area while her stomach tried to climb out through her throat. Catherine Chen found her 20 minutes before testimony. You ready? The prosecutor asked. No. Good. Means you're taking this seriously. They walked together through secured hallways toward the courtroom. Chen paused outside the doors. Remember, answer the question asked, nothing more. Don't let defense counsel bait you into emotional responses. Keep your voice steady. Look at the jury when you speak, not at Damien. Zariah nodded. The bailiff called her name. She walked through the doors into a courtroom that felt massive and claustrophobic simultaneously. Every seat filled, cameras positioned in the back. Damien sitting at the defense table wearing an expensive suit that made him look respectable instead of sociopathic. His eyes tracked her movement across the room. She refused to look directly at him. The bailiff swore her in. She sat in the witness box and folded her hands to hide the shaking. Catherine Chen approached with a legal pad and a calm expression designed to put witnesses at ease. Ms. Bennett, can you state your full name for the record? Zariah Bennett. And how do you know the defendant? He's my ex-husband. Can you describe the nature of your relationship during your marriage? Zariah took a breath and began. She testified for 4 hours that first day. Described meeting Damien at a fundraiser, the whirlwind courtship, the wedding that felt like a fairy tale until the honeymoon ended and reality set in. She talked about watching herself disappear piece by piece, about standing silent at criminal fundraisers, about the night he shoved her aside and demanded a divorce while replacing her with someone he considered more suitable. Chen walked her through the Belladonna Gala, through the foundation fire, through finding her bedroom destroyed and her wedding photo mutilated. The courtroom sat silent except for the scratch of journalists' pens and the occasional muffled cough. Did there come a time when you feared for your physical safety? Chen asked. Yes. Can you describe that for the jury? Zariah detailed the Inglewood Center shooting, the threats, the warehouse in Gary where Damien held a gun on Cassius while his men kidnapped a reporter to use as leverage. What were you feeling in that warehouse, Ms. Bennett? Terror. Certainty I was about to watch someone I loved die, and rage that a man I wasted 3 years trying to please thought he owned me so completely he could just erase me whenever I stopped being convenient. Defense counsel objected. The judge sustained. Chen moved on. At 4 o'clock, the judge called recess until morning. Zariah climbed down from the witness stand on legs that barely functioned. She made it to the women's restroom before her knees gave out, sat in a locked stall with her head between her knees trying to remember how to breathe. Someone knocked gently. Zariah? It's Catherine. She unlocked the door. Chen handed her a bottle of water and crouched beside her. You did great today, the prosecutor said. Better than great. You were credible, specific, emotional, without being performative. The jury believed every word. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's normal. Cross-examination starts tomorrow. It's going to be worse. I know. Chen squeezed her shoulder. But you're going to survive it, because you've already survived worse. Cross-examination began at 9 the following morning. Damien's defense attorney was a woman named Regina Blackwell, mid-50s, sharp as broken glass, with a reputation for eviscerating witnesses on the stand. She approached Zariah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Bennett, you testified yesterday that my client was controlling and abusive during your marriage, correct? Yes. Yet you stayed married to him for 3 years. I did. And during those 3 years, you lived in a penthouse worth $4 million? Yes. Drove luxury vehicles? Yes. Attended exclusive events with Chicago's elite? Yes. Blackwell paused dramatically. Sounds like a pretty comfortable prison, Ms. Bennett. Catherine Chen shot to her feet. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. Blackwell smiled. Let me rephrase. During your marriage, did you ever attempt to leave my client? Not physically, no. Did you seek help from domestic violence organizations? No. Did you contact police about abuse? No. In fact, Ms. Bennett, you continued attending events beside my client, smiling for photographs, playing the role of devoted wife right up until the moment he asked for a divorce. Isn't that true? Zariah's hands clenched in her lap. I was trying to survive. Or were you enjoying the benefits of being married to a powerful man and only claimed abuse after he chose to end the relationship? Objection! Chen's voice cracked like a whip. The judge sustained again, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the insinuation. Blackwell continued for 3 more hours, picking apart every statement, questioning every timeline, suggesting Zariah fabricated everything out of vindictive fury at being replaced. Isn't it true, Ms. Bennett, that you orchestrated the foundation fire yourself for publicity and insurance money? No. Isn't it true you seduced Cassius Kane specifically to hurt my client? No. Isn't it true you're lying right now to destroy a man you once claimed to love? No. By the time cross-examination ended, Zariah felt hollowed out, scraped raw, every vulnerability exposed to a courtroom full of strangers who now questioned whether she was victim or villain. She stepped down from the witness stand and walked out of the courthouse into afternoon light that felt too bright, too normal, too indifferent to the violence of institutional interrogation. Marcus was waiting outside with the car. You need food, he said. I need sleep. Food first. He drove her to a diner in Lincoln Park and ordered her soup she didn't want. She ate mechanically while her brain tried to process the last 8 hours. Chen says the jury's still with us, Marcus offered. Blackwell's attacks were obvious. Juries don't like watching women get shredded for surviving abuse. She made me sound like a gold digger. She did her job. Now the prosecution does theirs. They have 12 more witnesses, Zariah. Elena Moretti, Vincent D'Angelo, 3 FBI agents, Michaela Torres, financial experts. By the time they're finished, the jury won't remember Blackwell's theater. Zariah wanted to believe him. The trial continued for 5 more weeks. Elena Moretti testified about watching her son transform into a monster who valued power over people. She cried on the stand, describing the moment she decided to betray him to save someone he was trying to destroy. Vincent D'Angelo testified with flat professional efficiency about the criminal enterprise he helped build, about the warehouse, about Damien's orders to eliminate Zariah and Cassius permanently. Michaela Torres described being kidnapped, beaten, held with a knife to her throat, while Damien negotiated terms of Zariah's surrender. FBI agents presented financial evidence, shell corporations, money laundering, racketeering operations spanning 14 years. The prosecution built a mountain of evidence so comprehensive that Damien's defense looked increasingly desperate. On April 12th, closing arguments concluded. The jury deliberated for 63 hours across 4 days. Zariah spent those 4 days in a fugue state, foundation work during daylight, pacing her loft at night, visiting Cassius when detention center hours allowed. Whatever happens, Cassius said through the bulletproof glass during their last visit before verdict, you did everything right. What if they acquit? They won't. But what if? Then we deal with it, together. 5 years from now, when I'm out, we'll figure out whatever comes next. I don't know if I can survive 5 years if he walks free. Cassius's expression went hard. Yes, you can. Because you're Zariah Bennett and you survived 3 years beside him. You survived your headquarters burning. You survived a warehouse where you thought you'd watch me die. You can survive anything. The guard called time. On April 16th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the jury sent word they had reached a verdict. Zariah sat in the gallery between Catherine Chen and Marcus Washington, her heart trying to pound through her sternum. The courtroom filled rapidly, journalists jockeying for position, federal agents lining the walls, spectators cramming into every available seat. Damien sat at the defense table looking calm, confident, untouchable. The jury filed in. No one looked at the defense table. That was the tell. Zariah knew it before the foreman opened his mouth. The judge asked for the verdict. On count 1, conspiracy to commit arson, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in whispers. On count 2, attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. Damien's composure cracked. On count 3, kidnapping, guilty. Count 4, witness tampering, guilty. 43 counts total. Guilty on every single one. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, while Damien's lawyers immediately started filing motions and objections and appeals that everyone knew were futile. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Zariah sat frozen while chaos swirled around her. Relief and rage and exhaustion tangled so tight she couldn't separate them. Catherine Chen was saying something about this being a historic conviction, about setting precedent, about justice finally served. But all Zariah could think about was that Damien Moretti, the man who made her feel invisible, who destroyed her work, who tried to erase her from existence, would spend the rest of his life in a cage. And somehow, that still didn't feel like enough. Sentencing day arrived with the brutal efficiency of inevitability. May 28th, federal courthouse. Same courtroom, different energy. The jury was gone. Only the judge, the lawyers, and the defendant remained to determine how many lifetimes Damien Moretti would spend in prison. Catherine Chen argued for maximum sentencing on all counts. Regina Blackwell argued for leniency, for concurrent sentencing, for recognition that her client was a human being capable of redemption. The judge listened to both sides with an expression carved from granite. Then he asked if the defendant wished to make a statement. Damien stood. For 3 years, Zariah watched this man command rooms through intimidation and charisma. Now he looked smaller, diminished. The suit that once made him look powerful, just emphasizing how thoroughly he'd been stripped of everything that made him dangerous. I made mistakes, Damien said, his voice steady but lacking its usual arrogance. I hurt people I claimed to care about. I built something rotten and called it an empire. He paused. And for half a second, Zariah thought he might actually apologize. But I refused to be destroyed by a vindictive ex-wife and a disloyal lieutenant who couldn't handle that I chose someone better. The moment shattered. Catherine Chen's jaw dropped. Regina Blackwell physically winced. The judge's expression went cold. That's enough, Mr. Moretti, the judge said. But Damien kept talking, his voice rising. You think sending me to prison changes anything? I built networks that will outlive this conviction. I have resources you can't touch. People who owe me favors. Bailiff, remove the defendant. Guards moved forward, but Damien wasn't finished. His eyes locked onto Zariah sitting in the gallery. You think you won? He snarled. You're nothing without me. You've always been nothing. And 5 years from now, when your little boyfriend gets out, you'll still be nothing because that's all you ever were. The guards grabbed him, forcing him back into his seat while the judge banged the gavel so hard it echoed like gunfire. Mr. Moretti, if you cannot control yourself, you will be removed from this courtroom and sentencing will proceed in your absence. Damien fell silent, breathing hard. His mask finally shattered completely to reveal the ugliness underneath. The judge took a moment to compose himself. Then he delivered the sentence. On count 1, 20 years. On count 2, life in prison. On count 3, the counts kept stacking. Life sentences, decades, centuries of time compressed into words that meant Damien Moretti would die in a federal supermax facility. Consecutive sentencing, no possibility of parole, effective immediately. The guards moved in. Damien struggled as they handcuffed him, still shouting, still trying to maintain some illusion of power even as they dragged him toward the door. As they passed Zariah's row, he managed to wrench partially free. Their eyes met for the last time. I could have made you a queen, he hissed. Zariah stood, walked to the barrier separating the gallery from the well of the court, looked him directly in the eyes. I was always a queen, she said quietly. You just couldn't see past your own reflection. Then she turned her back and walked out of the courtroom while guards dragged Damien Moretti away, screaming. Outside, Chicago's sunshine felt like resurrection. Catherine Chen caught up to her on the courthouse steps. You okay? The prosecutor asked. No, but I will be, Chen smiled. For what it's worth. That was the most satisfying sentencing I've witnessed in 20 years of prosecuting criminals. They shook hands. Chen disappeared back into the courthouse to handle post-trial paperwork. Marcus waited by his truck. Where to? He asked. Zariah pulled out her phone and checked the time. 3 o'clock. Visiting hours at the Federal Detention Center ended at 4. I need to see Cassius, she said. Let's go. They made it with 12 minutes to spare. Zariah sat at the visitation booth while Cassius was brought out. When he saw her face, he smiled. I heard, he said through the phone. Life sentence, consecutive, no parole. It's over. Yeah, it is. She pressed her palm against the glass. He mirrored it. 4 years and 7 months, Cassius said. That's all that's left between us and freedom. The math still felt impossible. But for the first time in months, it also felt survivable. I'll be here, Zariah said. Every week, every month, every year, however long it takes. I know you will. The guard called time. They held each other's gaze until the last possible second. Then Cassius was gone, and Zariah walked back out into afternoon light that felt different now. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, like she'd been looking through dirty glass for years and someone finally wiped it clean. She climbed into Marcus's truck. Home? He asked. Zariah thought about the loft, about empty rooms that echoed with absence, about 4 more years of counting days until Cassius came back. Then she thought about the foundation, about the hundreds of people whose lives changed because she refused to stay invisible, about the work still waiting, the communities needing support, the future demanding she show up anyway, despite exhaustion and grief and the relentless weight of survival. No, she said. Take me to the office. I have work to do. Marcus grinned. There's the Zariah, I know. They drove through Chicago toward the Bennett Horizon Foundation headquarters, while the city hummed around them indifferent and eternal. And Zariah Bennett, philanthropist, survivor, the woman who burned and rose from her own ashes, prepared to keep building the empire Damien Moretti never understood was always hers to begin with, not built on fear, not built on control, but built on the radical act of refusing to disappear. 4 years and 7 months felt like both eternity and heartbeat. Zariah counted every day the way prisoners count scratches on cell walls, obsessively, desperately, like numbers alone could make time move faster. She visited Cassius every week without exception, drove 2 hours each way to the federal facility downstate where he served his sentence, sat across from him in a visiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner and institutional hopelessness, and talked about everything except how much the separation was killing them both. The Bennett Horizon Foundation expanded across 7 states. By the second year after Damien's conviction, they had helped over 10,000 students graduate, launched 400 new businesses, and transformed 23 communities from forgotten to flourishing. Zariah testified before Congress twice more about criminal justice reform and economic opportunity in underserved neighborhoods. Forbes featured her on their cover with the headline, "The Phoenix: How Zariah Bennett Built an Empire from Ashes." She kept the magazine but never read the article. Looking at her own face smiling from glossy paper felt like staring at a stranger. Because beneath the accomplishments and recognition and transformation, Zariah Bennett was exhausted down to her bones. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. The soul-deep weariness that came from carrying too much for too long without permission to set anything down. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her assistant started scheduling mandatory lunch breaks after finding Zariah passed out at her desk from hunger and overwork. Marcus Washington threatened to physically remove her from the office if she didn't start taking weekends off. "You're burning out," he said bluntly during a foundation board meeting in year 3. "And if you collapse, this entire organization suffers." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." He was right. Everyone knew it. But admitting exhaustion felt like admitting defeat, and Zariah had forgotten how to surrender. The nightmares came in waves. Some nights she dreamed about the warehouse in Gary, Cassius on his knees with a gun pressed against his skull, Vincent's finger tightening on the trigger, the certainty she was about to watch someone she loved die. Other nights she dreamed about Damien standing in their bedroom saying she was too soft, too quiet, too invisible to matter. She'd wake up gasping, heart hammering, sheets soaked with sweat, and the loft around her would feel enormous and empty without Cassius there to remind her the nightmares were just echoes of survived trauma. Year 4 brought unexpected complications. Valentina Cruz reached out in October, asking to meet for coffee. Zariah almost declined, but curiosity won over caution. They met at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park on a Saturday morning when the city felt softer, less aggressive. Valentina looked different, less polished, more real. She wore minimal makeup and jeans instead of designer everything, her famous face somehow more beautiful for being less perfect. "Thank you for meeting me," Valentina said as they sat down with overpriced lattes neither would finish. "I wasn't sure I would." "I don't blame you. I participated in your worst nightmare." "You didn't know what you were participating in." "That's not an excuse." Valentina wrapped both hands around her cup. "I spent 2 years in therapy unpacking why I kept choosing men like Damien. Powerful, charming, fundamentally incapable of seeing women as human. Did you figure it out?" "Mostly. Turns out when your father abandons you at 9 and your stepfather tells you beauty is the only currency that matters. You grow up believing your value exists entirely in how men perceive you." The honesty felt startling. "I'm sorry," Zariah said quietly. "Don't apologize for my trauma. I'm the one who owes you apology. For believing Damien when he said you were weak. For standing beside him at that gala while he tried to humiliate you. For not seeing what was obvious, that you were always the strongest person in every room." Zariah's throat tightened. "I'm starting a foundation," Valentina continued, "for women escaping abuse from powerful partners. I want to fund legal services, relocation assistance, therapy. And I was hoping—" She paused, vulnerable in a way that transformed her from supermodel to human. "I was hoping you might consult. Help me build something that actually works instead of another vanity project that looks good on paper but helps no one." Zariah studied the woman across from her, someone she had every reason to hate, who instead became an unexpected mirror reflecting shared survival. "Okay," Zariah said, "I'll help." They spent the next 3 hours talking about structure, about funding, about the specific ways wealthy abusers weaponized resources to trap their victims. By the time they left, something had shifted. Not friendship exactly, but the foundation of potential alliance built on mutual understanding that pain didn't discriminate based on beauty or success. As they stood on the sidewalk preparing to part ways, Valentina touched Zariah's arm gently. "He tried to destroy you," she said. "But you're still here, still building, still refusing to disappear." That's the revenge Damien will never recover from. The word settled into Zariah's chest like truth she'd been too tired to recognize. Beach imopse batik. Cassius's release date arrived on a Tuesday in December. 4 years, 7 months, and 16 days after federal marshals led him into custody, he walked out of prison into winter sunshine that felt too bright, too real, too full of possibilities he'd forgotten existed outside concrete and razor wire. Zariah waited in the parking lot leaning against her car with her heart trying to tear through her sternum. She wore jeans and a wool coat, her hair natural and unstyled, no makeup, just herself unfiltered after years of performing strength for everyone watching. The door opened. Cassius emerged carrying a clear plastic bag containing the few possessions he'd been allowed to keep. He looked thinner, older, worn down by institutional living. Gray threaded through his hair now, lines carved deeper around his eyes and mouth. But when he saw Zariah, his entire face transformed. She met him halfway across the parking lot. They collided more than embraced, desperate, clumsy, 4 years of separation trying to compress into a single moment of contact. Zariah buried her face in his chest and felt his heart hammering beneath her cheek, steady and alive, and finally, impossibly, within reach. "You're real," she gasped against his shirt. "I'm real. You're here. I'm here." They stood holding each other while other released prisoners filed past with their own families, their own reunions, their own attempts to reconcile freedom with the time they'd lost. Finally, they pulled apart enough to look at each other properly. "You look exhausted," Cassius said, touching her face gently. "You look like you haven't slept in 4 years." "Neither have you." The brutal honesty of it made them both laugh, rough, broken sounds that acknowledged everything words couldn't touch. They climbed into Zariah's car and drove away from the prison in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the silence of two people relearning how to exist in the same space after years of forced separation. "Where to?" Zariah asked as they merged onto the highway. "I don't care. Anywhere but here." So she drove. North through Illinois farmland, then east toward Michigan. No destination, just movement, the highway unspooling beneath them while the afternoon turned to evening and the sky bled through shades of orange and purple before settling into star-scattered darkness. They stopped at a roadside diner somewhere outside South Bend. Ordered food neither was hungry for, and coffee they didn't need. Sat across from each other in a booth with cracked vinyl seats and tried to bridge the gap 4 years had carved between them. "Tell me about the foundation," Cassius said. So Zariah did. Described the expansion, the congressional testimony, the Forbes cover. Talked about Valentina's new project, about Marcus still running security like a protective uncle, about the Englewood Center now serving 300 kids daily. "You built everything you said you would," Cassius said quietly. "We built it. You testified. Without that, Damien walks free and none of this happens. I testified to save you. You built an empire." The weight of his pride felt almost unbearable. "What about you?" Zariah asked. "What was it like?" "Really?" Cassius's expression shuddered slightly, the instinctive protection of someone who survived by not showing vulnerability. "It was exactly what you'd expect. Brutal. Dehumanizing. Every day felt like drowning in slow motion." He paused. "But I survived because every week you showed up, every phone call, every letter. You were the only thing that felt real." Zariah's eyes burned. "I almost stopped coming," she whispered. 6 months ago. I was so tired, Cassius, so empty, and driving 4 hours round trip to sit across from you for 45 minutes started feeling like I was keeping us both trapped in something we should have let go." "Why didn't you?" "Because I remembered something you said, that first night at the Belladonna Gala. You told me you saw me fully, and I realized no one else ever had. Not my parents, not Damien, just you. And that was worth 4 years of exhaustion." Cassius reached across the table and took her hand. "I meant every word," he said. "Then and now." They finished their coffee, paid the check, drove back to Chicago through darkness with their hands intertwined on the center console. The loft looked different than Cassius remembered. Zariah had redecorated during the years he was gone. New furniture, fresh paint, plants that somehow stayed alive despite her claiming she had a black thumb. The space felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like visiting a childhood home after decades away. You can stay here, Zariah said, suddenly uncertain. I mean, if you want, or I can help you find. Cassius kissed her, not tentatively. Hard and hungry, 4 years of deprivation compressed into desperate contact. Zariah responded immediately, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer while her brain finally stopped calculating and just felt. They made love that night with the frantic intensity of people trying to prove they still existed beyond separation. It was imperfect, awkward. Bodies relearning each other after time had reshaped them both. But underneath the physical reconnection, something deeper solidified. The recognition that what they built was strong enough to survive 4 years of forced distance. Afterward, they lay tangled together while Chicago glittered beyond the windows. I don't know how to do this, Cassius said quietly. How to be a person again outside those walls. How to wake up without guards counting heads. How to make decisions without every choice being made for me. We'll figure it out together. What if I can't? What if prison broke something permanently? Zariah turned to face him fully. Then we work with whatever's left. Because people aren't fixed or broken, Cassius. We're just constantly becoming different versions of ourselves, and I'd rather become whatever comes next with you than become anything without you. His eyes shimmered in the darkness. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. They fell asleep wrapped around each other while the city hummed outside and the future waited patiently for them to be ready. But reintegration was harder than either expected. Cassius struggled with crowds, with noise, with the overwhelming choices civilian life demanded. Grocery stores paralyzed him with too many options. Restaurants made him anxious. He couldn't sleep through the night, his body trained to wake at guard checks that no longer happened. Zariah watched him fight invisible battles and felt helpless. I'm not him, Cassius said one night after a particularly bad episode where he'd woken up swinging at phantoms. I know. No, you don't. I see how you look at me sometimes, like you're waiting for me to break, like I'm damaged goods you're too kind to throw away. The accusation stung because it carried uncomfortable truth. I'm not waiting for you to break, Zariah said carefully. I'm waiting for permission to admit I'm barely holding myself together, and maybe we're both damaged, and that's okay. Cassius stared at her. You're exhausted, he said finally. I'm beyond exhausted. I'm running on fumes and stubbornness and terror that if I stop moving, I'll fall apart completely. Then stop. I can't. Yes, you can. The foundation doesn't need you 70 hours a week. You have competent staff. Delegate. Step back. Let yourself be human instead of performing invincibility for people who don't understand the cost. The permission felt dangerous. What if I stop and there's nothing underneath, she whispered. What if I've been performing so long I forgot who I actually am? Cassius pulled her close. Then we figure that out together too. They started therapy, individual and couples. Zariah worked through trauma she'd been carrying since childhood, the abandonment issues her father created when he walked out, the way she learned to make herself smaller to avoid triggering angry men. Cassius processed prison trauma, the violence he witnessed, the parts of himself he had to bury to survive institutional living. Together, they worked on rebuilding relationship foundations after 4 years of forced separation transformed them both into people the other barely recognized. It was brutal, exhausting work. Some days felt like regression. They fought about things that didn't matter, dishes, schedules, whose turn it was to buy groceries, because fighting about survival felt too overwhelming. But slowly, the edges softened. Cassius started sleeping through most nights, found work with Marcus Washington's security firm doing consulting for corporate clients who needed protection protocols without criminal connections, rediscovered the person he used to be before Damian Moretti recruited him into organized crime. Zariah cut back her foundation hours to 40 per week, promoted her director of operations to executive director, and actually let him run things without micromanaging. Started painting again, something she hadn't done since college, and discovered that creating beauty helped process pain in ways therapy couldn't quite reach. 6 months after Cassius's release, they took a vacation. Just a weekend trip to a cabin in Wisconsin, but it felt monumental. They hiked through forests, kayaked on lakes, sat on the deck watching sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. On the second night, Cassius built a fire in the stone fireplace while Zariah made dinner from ingredients they'd bought at a local farmer's market. They ate on the floor using the coffee table. No phones, no work talk, just two people existing together without performance. "I've been thinking," Cassius said, setting down his fork. "Dangerous." He smiled. "I want to marry you." Zariah's breath caught. "Not now," he continued quickly. "Not until we're both sure we're choosing each other from health instead of trauma. But eventually, when we're ready, that could be years. I've got time." She studied his face in the firelight, this man who saw her when she was invisible, who waited 4 years behind bars while she rebuilt an empire, who came out of prison broken and still chose to heal beside her instead of running from the mess they'd created. "I want that too," she said quietly. Eventually. They finished dinner, washed dishes together, made love slowly, carefully, like people learning each other's new landscapes after time had redrawn their maps. And for the first time in 5 years, Zariah felt something she'd forgotten existed. Peace. Unlike 1 year after Cassius's release, Damian Moretti died in federal supermax. Heart attack, according to official reports. Quick, efficient, no warning. He was 52. The news hit Zariah while she was leading a foundation board meeting. Her assistant interrupted with a note. Zariah read it, excused herself, and walked to the women's restroom where she locked herself in a stall and waited for feelings to arrive. Relief came first. The visceral, guilty satisfaction that the man who tried to destroy her was permanently gone. Then grief, not for Damian, but for the 3 years she wasted trying to love someone incapable of loving her back. Then anger at herself for feeling anything at all about a man who deserved nothing but erasure. Finally, exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of carrying hate that no longer had a target. She splashed cold water on her face, fixed her makeup, and returned to the board meeting like nothing happened. That night, she told Cassius. They sat on the loft's balcony watching Chicago shimmer beneath December snow, while her words hung in the cold air between them. "How do you feel?" Cassius asked. "I don't know. How am I supposed to feel?" "However you actually feel, there's no right answer." Zariah pulled her coat tighter. "Relieved," she said finally, "that he can't hurt anyone else, but also cheated. Because I wanted him to suffer longer, wanted him to spend decades in a cage understanding what he took from people. Heart attack felt too easy." "Maybe. But he died alone in Supermax, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed, knowing the woman he tried to erase built something bigger than anything he ever created. That's not nothing. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does." They sat in silence while snow fell softly around them. "Do you think we would have found each other if Damian hadn't been exactly who he was?" Zariah asked. "I don't know, maybe not. Does it matter?" "I guess not. Just strange to think the worst relationship of my life led directly to the best." Cassius took her hand. "Nothing about our story is simple," he said, "but simple stories don't teach you how strong you actually are." 2 years after Cassius's release, they got married. Not a massive production, just 40 people in the Foundation's community center. Close friends, Foundation staff, Marcus Washington officiating because he'd gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. Zariah wore cream silk, simple and elegant, her natural hair styled in loose curls. Cassius wore navy blue that made his eyes look impossibly warm. They wrote their own vows. "I promise to see you," Cassius said, his voice steady but emotional. "Fully and always. Even when you're trying to disappear, even when you're exhausted, even when life makes being seen feel dangerous. I promise to remind you that you're extraordinary even on days you forget." Zariah's eyes filled. "I promise to keep showing up," she said, "through exhaustion and fear and all the ways trauma tries to convince me that love isn't safe. I promise to choose you daily, consciously, from health instead of desperation. And I promise that we'll build something together that honors both our strength and our brokenness." Marcus pronounced them married while 40 people applauded, and Zariah kissed her husband beneath string lights that turned the community center into something magical. The reception was simple, joyful, unpretentious. They danced to Etta James while their friends celebrated survival more than romance. Elena Moretti attended, frail but present, the mother of a monster who chose to save her son's victim instead of enabling his destruction. She hugged Zariah and whispered, "Thank you for showing me it's never too late to choose right." Valentina Cruz came with her new girlfriend, a civil rights attorney who made her laugh constantly. Michaela Torres brought her fiancé and gave Zariah a framed copy of the Tribune article that started everything with an inscription: "For the woman who taught me what courage actually looks like." At midnight, Cassius and Zariah slipped away to the loft, climbed into bed still wearing their wedding clothes, lay tangled together while the city hummed outside and their rings caught lamplight. "We did it," Zariah whispered. "We survived. More than survived. We built something beautiful from the wreckage." Cassius kissed her forehead. "Not from the wreckage, despite it. That's the difference." 5 years after Damien's death, the Bennett Horizon Foundation operated in 12 states, serving over 50,000 individuals annually. Zariah stepped down as executive director, transitioning to board chair so she could focus on policy advocacy and strategic partnerships instead of daily operations. She published a memoir titled Invisible: Breaking Free from Men Who Can't See You. It became a New York Times bestseller and launched a national conversation about domestic abuse in wealthy households, about the specific ways powerful men weaponized resources to trap their partners, about how society enabled abusers by confusing charm with character. Cassius launched his own organization, Second Chance Security, providing employment and training for formerly incarcerated individuals trying to re-enter society. He understood better than anyone how difficult reintegration was, how society punished people long after they'd served their sentences, how redemption required community support instead of individual heroism. They bought a house in Hyde Park with a garden where Zariah grew vegetables, and Cassius built furniture in a workshop he constructed in the garage. They hosted dinners for friends, traveled when foundation work allowed, and lived quietly in the spaces between public accomplishment. Some days were still hard. Zariah occasionally woke from nightmares about warehouses and bullets. Cassius sometimes struggled with crowds. They both carried scars from trauma that time softened but never fully erased, but they carried those scars together. One evening in late autumn, they sat on their back porch, watching sunset paint the Chicago sky in shades of amber and rose. Zariah leaned against Cassius's chest while his arms wrapped around her waist, and they existed in comfortable silence that no longer needed filling. "Do you ever regret it?" Zariah asked quietly. "Everything we went through, the pain, the prison, all of it?" Cassius was quiet for a long moment. "I regret the violence," he said finally. "The people hurt along the way. The years lost. But regret you? Never. Because you taught me something I didn't know before." "What's that?" "That love doesn't mean possession. It means witness. Being seen so completely that hiding becomes impossible and unnecessary." Zariah turned in his arms to face him fully. "We're not the people we were when this started," she said. "No, we're better. Scarred, but better." She kissed him softly, and it tasted like survival and choice and all the messy, imperfect beauty that came from refusing to let trauma write the ending of their story. Because Zariah Bennett had spent 3 years invisible beside a man who couldn't see past his own reflection. She burned down her life and rebuilt it from ashes. She walked through warehouses expecting execution. She survived 4 years of separation that would have shattered weaker foundations. And through it all, she never stopped becoming more fully herself. Not because she was fearless, but because fear couldn't make her smaller anymore. The night Damien Moretti told her she was too soft, too quiet, too invisible to matter, he didn't realize he was speaking to a woman who would transform invisibility into her greatest weapon. Because people who can't be seen can move through the world unnoticed, building empires while their enemies waste time trying to destroy ghosts. And by the time Damien understood what he'd thrown away, Zariah Bennett had already become untouchable. Not through power or wealth or revenge, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to believe the cruel version of herself created by a man incapable of recognizing treasure even when it slept beside him every night. She was always a queen, the world just took too long to notice. But Cassius Kane saw her from the beginning, saw her when she couldn't see herself, waded through prison and trauma and all the ways love tests people to prove whether they're building on foundation or fantasy. And when he got out, when the waiting finally ended, they built something neither had words for. A partnership that honored both strength and vulnerability, that celebrated survival without glorifying suffering, that understood love wasn't about completing each other, but about choosing daily to witness each other's full humanity. They were scarred, they were tired, they were beautifully, imperfectly alive. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Zariah would speak at events about resilience and survival, people always asked the same question: how did you get through it? And she always gave the same answer: one breath at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time, to keep showing up for myself even when showing up felt impossible. You don't survive by being fearless. You survive by being afraid and doing it anyway. Then she'd look at Cassius sitting in the audience, his eyes steady on hers, and she'd remember the night at the Belladonna Gala when he stood before Chicago's most dangerous criminals and said, "I see you," like those 3 words contained entire universes. And she'd smile. Because the truth no memoir or interview could fully capture was this: Zariah Bennett didn't need saving. She needed someone brave enough to watch her save herself. And Cassius Cain was brave enough to witness her resurrection without trying to claim credit for the miracle. That was the real love story. Not the fairy tale where the man rescued the princess, but the human story where 2 broken people chose to heal beside each other, to witness each other's darkness without flinching, to build something honest instead of something perfect. They didn't get a happily ever after. They got something better. They got real. And real, messy, scarred, imperfect, exhausting, beautiful real was worth every brutal moment it took to get there. The night Damian Moretti walked away believing he discarded someone ordinary was the exact night he lost the most extraordinary woman he would ever know. And she never looked back. Because queens don't waste time mourning men who were never worthy of the throne. They just keep building kingdoms.